The Battle of the Madwood. That was the name it would be given. The clash where Fry and Snow stood against the Ultras. The Madwood was so called because it was where the Blood Queen, Evelyn, spent most of her time and performed her vilest experiments. Misshapen humans were often sighted wandering that forest. Stranger still, it lay within one of the largest high-blood cities. Shiskler, the Ultras had set a meticulous trap to draw in Fry, and to finish Snow along with him in one stroke. The Empire's champions, its knights, the Black Knight and the White, found themselves encircled by the Ultras' full force. No one knew how those forces had massed so quickly, nor what had happened to the other fronts of the war. It didn't matter anymore. Fry and Snow were forced to fight once again. Both had grown to a level that defied the Ultras' understanding, but, unfortunately for them, neither could fight at full power. Snow was still drained from his battle with Geppetto's champions and from Evelyn's restraints. Fry Starlight, too, had yet to fully replenish his aura after the fight with Zebar. And worse, he had shared a portion of it with Snow so he could stand and fight at all. With aura scarce and bodies worn down, neither could unleash everything. Fry couldn't use Dark Ascension, which demanded a full reservoir of aura, and he could fire Nameless Judgment only once. As for Snow, entering the Anointed War state was impossible. The battle would be grueling. It was the Ultras' one chance to kill them before it was too late. And so the battle ignited. Hell itself. The spell batteries never stopped. The sky was blanketed with thousands of shells raining over their heads. Gavid Lindemann and Murgo rushed in at once, V with them, and even Belith, the 18th-ranked demon, moved to join the assault. The witch Beatrice was present as well, and she had prepared the field with thousands of preset incantations, making her the most dangerous opponent on that ground. At one point in the fighting, back-to-back, Fry and Snow no longer knew what they were facing. They simply cut down anything that came within reach. Even short of their full power, they still had more than enough to crush whatever stood before them. Especially Fry, after fusing Dark Sister with Balerion and wielding the aura of the black hole, which made his strikes far deadlier than before. In the thick of it, he met V face to face. The Ultra's mimic had taken Frey's form, trying to copy him. Moonlight sword in one hand, a claymore in the other, and the forms of 10,000 steps of shadow woven between. At the sight, Fry could only laugh. Trying to copy me? Sorry, but your build is a little outdated. Channeling a torrent of black hole aura, Fry unleashed a colossal cut that swallowed V whole and sent him flying with ease. I'd love a proper duel, copycat, but you brought far too many friends. Outnumbered, Fry couldn't waste time on any single foe. He and Snow pushed forward together, carving a path and trying to break the Ultra's net. As the minutes turned to hours, both took their share of wounds. Yet Frey's regeneration and Snow's holy vitality kept them going. The worst threat was Beatrice's lattice of spells, springing from every angle as if she had foreseen their every attempt to escape. Worst of all, she remained far enough back that Fry couldn't shut her down with anti-magic. One-on-one, none of the Ultras present could match Fry or Snow now. But by tightening the net and layering pressure, they began to grind the two down. Time blurred. Seconds, minutes, then hours. As the two were hunted through a high-blood city swarming with enemies, most of the Ultras threw themselves at the slaughter with fanatic resolve. What truly shifted the feel of the battlefield, though, was the hesitation radiating from a few of them. Especially Beatrice, who, despite launching thousands of spells, carried no killing intent toward them. The other surprising hesitation came from Murgo, the swordsman. Warriors like him could transmit their hearts through their blades. From V, Fry felt envy and spite. From Gavid, boiling rage and hatred. But from Murgo's great Ushigatana came only one thing: curiosity. His certainty deepened in the instant their blades crossed and Murgo leaned in, whispering something at his ear. Too quickly for anyone else to catch. Fry hurled him back with a vicious cut and ran on with Snow. But he kept one eye on the old lord, mind turning over the words. The Ultras were strange. They were human too. Humans who had traded away their humanity and sold themselves to demons. Yet it wasn't right to brand them all the same. Many had never been given a choice, forced to shoulder the sins of their forebears. Fry had known that truth for a long time, but he hadn't cared much. What was right in a place like this was to seek a way through, and save whatever could still be saved. That's what a true hero would have done. But Fry never saw himself that way. He entered this war intent on eradicating them, on ending their lives. Yes, they weren't responsible for their forefathers' sins, and many had been forced onto this path long ago. But this was war, and in war everyone has their reasons. So long as they stood in his way and tried to kill him, Fry would never hesitate to cut them down without a blink. Even if they were good men, even if they were fathers and sons, that was, and still is, the principle Fry lives by. He meant to kill them all, yet the Ultras, it seemed, did not fully return the sentiment. Most of them did try to kill the two of them, laying a deadly trap. But others didn't even seem to be trying in earnest. Because of that, Fry and Snow managed to carve a path through by force and break out of the encirclement after hours of non-stop fighting. The pursuit continued for a while, the Ultras dogging their heels, until, at last, the chase faltered as the pair drew too close to the allies Fry had left behind earlier. After running for hours, they finally reached a place far enough to catch their breath. Both were heavily depleted, but beyond that, neither bore any injury worth mentioning. As they drew breath, Snow Lionheart spoke first. "What exactly just happened?" Fry shook his head. "I don't know. Given all the preparations they made, I thought it would be far deadlier. But, despite being surrounded, neither of them ever felt it was a true fight to the death. It was like a staged play, not a life-and-death battle," Snow said, and Fry agreed. "The Ultras are acting strangely. From where I stand, they've already lost this war. They don't have anything left to put on the field." Fry was right and Snow nodded. "The demons are the real enemy now. The greater threat. The demons have always been the enemy. From the very beginning," Fry replied, tightening a strap on his armor. "We only started recognizing their presence recently. They're far too strong, and there are few humans who can stand against them." Snow agreed, and Fry asked the question that had been nagging at him. "Given how strong you are now, it's hard to imagine you losing. Was your opponent rank 13? Snow was briefly surprised Fry knew it was Geppetto, but let it pass. "That's right. I ran into him on my way to link up with you, but I didn't lose to him. I lost to something far worse." Fray's expression hardened. "Stronger than a rank 13 demon? Is there such a thing?" "Yes, a real monster. He seemed like Geppetto's subordinate, but he was much stronger. Strong enough to beat me quickly, even after I triggered my strongest state." Snow remembered the man. His strikes were fast and brutally heavy. His aura control was absolute perfect. "In a way I've never seen. And he's definitely not a demon." "One of Geppetto's corpses, then," Fry said, sinking into thought. "A corpse stronger than Geppetto himself? Does something like that even exist?" With all the intel he'd gathered, Fry couldn't recall anything like it. Geppetto did command several SSS-class fighters, but all of them were weaker than he was, for one of them to surpass him. And by Snow's account, by a lot. Boded ill. "How strong is he, exactly?" Fry pressed. Snow's answer was sobering. "We'll have to fight him together. At the same time, if we want a chance." It landed like a weight. From that alone, it meant the man Snow spoke of was, at minimum, stronger than the half-power clone of Zebar that Fry had faced. And that was no good news for them. With an irritable sigh, Fry glanced up at the sky, darkening by the moment, the split moon stark over their heads, and chose to shelve it for now. For the moment, let's finish the Ultras properly. Once they dealt with them, they could turn fully to the demons and the rest. "Let's go," Fry said, and Snow frowned. "Go where?" he asked, because the direction Fry took wasn't toward their companions, but the exact opposite. "There's someone we need to meet. He's piqued my curiosity." Fry told Snow about the odd, drunken old man who had leaned in during the melee and whispered a place to meet. That was the moment Fry understood the Ultras weren't trying to kill them all. that their lives had never truly been on the line. Lord Murgo, half demon, half human, and wholly peculiar. Meeting him would decide the fate of the Ultras. As Fry and Snow moved swiftly through enemy territory, a long silence stretched between them. Both were steadying their balance and strength even as they traveled. To each of them it all felt like a dream, a strange, unreal dream. Neither had ever imagined they could slip a full Ultra encirclement this easily, even in such a depleted state. True, they hadn't been able to do much to their enemies, but by the same token, their enemies hadn't been able to do much to them. Once they focused on escape, they broke through cleanly. Now the two of them were heading to a specific place, to meet one of the enemy. Fry, are you sure this isn't some kind of trap? Snow asked, scowling, unconvinced by the idea of a parley. Fry shook his head with a wry smile. And if it is? Didn't we just walk out of a death trap with their full forces? Can't argue with that. Still, it reeks. Why would the enemy ask for a meeting now of all times? The Ultras usually chose the sword over words. A summons like this was anything but normal. But this was Murgo, the peculiar Ultra Lord who had long piqued Frey's curiosity. At the very least, that old man is different. He's always had a philosophy of his own, and for the first time, I found myself losing the exchange when I faced him before. Fry remembered the desperate fight he once waged against 1,000 men, only for Murgo to appear at the end. It was one of the bleakest moments of his flight through Ultras, perhaps the first time he truly lost control of himself and Nameless moved his body. Though he wasn't certain, it felt less like Nameless seized him and more like he fought on reflex without awareness. He had survived that clash against Murgo, who was stronger than him then. But every so often Fry still recalled what the old man said. Whether it's me or him, we're both beasts made to destroy, not to mend. And one day, each of us will meet an end befitting what our hands have done. Murgo's outlook had, in its way, influenced Frey's thinking. In the Empire and among the Ultras alike, there were rampaging monsters who deserved to die someday. And there were heroes as well. Standing on one side or the other never excused what your hands did. The guilty would be held to account sooner or later. Fry, as he was now, believed that completely. And he'd already accepted it. Whatever fate or punishment awaited him, he intended to shoulder it. Take it all. It was exactly what he deserved. In just a single year, since the pursuit through Ultras with the Temple's elite students, Fry had grown far more mature. His strength wasn't the only thing that had increased. And all of that, in a sense, began with his fight against Murgo. So meeting that old man again held Frey's interest. Snow, for his part, decided to go along and see what the enemy intended. Come to think of it, did you come alone to pull me out? Snow asked. No. Our friends from the temple were with me, but I broke off as soon as I sensed you, Fry answered, recalling the instant he'd felt Snow's presence, teleporting to him at once without a word and leaving the others behind. They'll probably be annoyed, but given the trap we ran into, this was the better call. Fry and Snow were the exceptions. They'd taken wounds and cuts during the breakout, but one could regenerate and the other carried a sanctified power that healed him on its own, on top of both having enormous personal strength. Bringing the others would only have been a hindrance. I already know where they are. The plan was to find you and go straight back, but the latest turn of events made me reconsider. We'll rejoin them once we finish what we have to do here. Fry knew he'd kept them waiting longer than he should have. It would likely grate on more than a few, especially Uriel, who truly wanted to support him. But so long as they were safe, that was what mattered. I see you still don't like relying on others, Snow said, calling out Frey's lone wolf nature, the habit that had him fighting alone again and again. Fry shook his head. Not true. I rely on you. That's good to hear. You, more than anyone, need to remember you can't change everything by yourself. No matter how strong you are, there will always be someone stronger, especially among the demons, who counted many world-shaking monsters. I know that already, Fry replied. Against those greater foes, he'd have no choice but to join forces with Snow if they hoped to bring them down. It was the only realistic option, given that Fry still hadn't broken into SSS class. The system had stopped giving him quests and achievement points, leaving his current aptitude stalled at SS+. Breaking through to SSS would be impossible without shattering that cap. Thinking on that, silence fell again as they ran. There was too much to do, and the War of Darkness meant something different to the Empire than it did to the Ultras. If the Ultras won, the war would end at once. If the Empire won, that would only mean conquering the human front and opening the line against the demons. In other words, the war wouldn't end anytime soon for them. It felt like an eternal struggle that would drag on for many long years, just as the races above had suffered, fighting demons for millennia and still fighting to this day. It feels like this war will never end, Snow murmured. Viewed that way, it was enough to make anyone despair. It always has, Fry said. All we can do is adapt, like we always have. He said it. And then he stopped. We're here. Standing atop a fairly high cliff, Fry swept his aura out over the open ground below. This was the place Murgo had told him about. Looks like they're here too. They? Snow asked, expecting only one person. Yeah, 3 of them. Apparently, Murgo hadn't come alone. Be careful. We don't know what they're about to pull, Snow warned. No need to worry. I'm already aware, Fry replied. He dropped from the cliff, Snow following close behind. Moments later, they reached their destination. There, in a bowl of stone ringed by rocks and low ridges, the old man Murgo sat on a simple boulder, drinking from his flask. Beside him stood a girl in Victorian dress with a modest hat. Her eyes were crimson, her skin startlingly pale. Empyrean Maria. On the other side waited a white-haired youth with a ruined face, whose sight made Frey's brow crease. The ghoul Lawrence. The very one Fry was sure he had beheaded. At the sight of Fry, Lawrence nearly flew into a frenzy, but Murgo stopped him at once. Where are your manners, Lawrence? These gentlemen are our guests. With a light, rapid series of taps, Murgo struck Lawrence's body and dropped him to the ground, half paralyzed. Forgive my retainer's rudeness. He's not entirely stable, Murgo said pleasantly. Fry and Snow studied him in silence for a beat, then spoke. Murgo, this is the 4th time we've met face to face, Fry said, recalling their history. And the first without our swords crossing. The first had been during the pursuit, which ended with Fry losing control and Murgo withdrawing. The second time he lost control again and faced Murgo with 3 others. The third had been a token clash during the recent siege. This was the 4th. We do tend to fight, Murgo smiled. It's what our natures demand, isn't it? You and I, we were made to destroy. He took a pull from his flask and went on. But the difference is that you've become a beast far beyond my measure, Fry Starlight. And you as well, Snow Lionheart. You both look alike to me. Enough empty talk. Say what you came to say. We've no time to waste on you. Snow cut in, openly ready to fight. If this went poorly, he was prepared to kill them on the spot. All 3 were key ultra combatants. Murgo didn't so much as flinch at the hostility. Very well, let's be brief then. Tell me, what do you think happens in this war from here? Fry answered without pause. The Ultras will be annihilated in the next battle. You don't have a path to victory anymore. Murgo nodded. That's true, and completely wrong at the same time. Toying with the flask, he continued, You're not a fool, Fry Starlight. Think. Remember what you've seen. Remember who your enemies are. And your allies. Does this war really look like a simple clash between the Empire and the Ultras? He asked the question. And answered it himself. That's a major mistake. This is a play, directed by people tugging strings from the shadows. And your friend the prince is the clearest example. He brought up Aegon out of nowhere. Everything that has happened, and everything that will happen, is being steered by them. And even if you refuse to look, you too are an actor in their theater, Fry Starlight. No matter how strong you are, you couldn't break the bounds of the script they're running. Yet the prince, weaker than you, did. Strange, isn't it? Of course it wasn't normal. especially where the prince was concerned. Aegon Valyrian was so opaque in motive that Fry had begun to wonder if the young man was even human. Fry had turned it over day and night and found no answer. The prince hid his hand too well. "What are you driving at?" Fry asked, urging Murgo to get to the point. At that moment, Maria stepped forward and spoke for the first time. "What we want from you, Fry Starlight, and from you, Snow Lionheart, is that you consider an alliance." Both men blinked. "An alliance? With whom?" "You three." "Forgive my rudeness. I haven't introduced myself," the woman said with a slight bow. "My name is Maria. I belong, with Master Murgo, to a certain group. You may call us an organization, if you like. The name is the Black Order. Our sole aim is to preserve as many Ultra lives as possible." She gestured toward Murgo and their true stance. "Like you, we despise what the demons are doing to our kind. We chose to fight, but in our own way." "In your own way?" Snow scoffed. "By submitting to them and doing as they command?" Maria nodded. "Yes, we had no choice. The demons are so strong that to them we're insects. Resistance meant extinction. So we chose to lower our heads and submit." "And where did that get you?" "I don't see much result," Fry said. "On the contrary, we've saved thousands. By working from the shadows, keeping out of the spotlight," Maria replied. "Though we lost many in the attempt. All because we lacked the means to fight. For us humans, there was no chance. But recently, a glimmer of hope has appeared. One that might be our salvation." Murgo took over again. "And that hope is you. Fry Starlight and Snow Lionheart. Human fighters who can stand against the strongest demons. You may be the only hope left. That's the conclusion I reached after watching long enough from afar, watching how you grew. What I offer you is a chance. An alliance to save as many humans as possible, whether of the Empire or the Ultras, and to work with us, the Black Order. From the shadows to make it happen." He extended his hand to them. "Let's join forces. Against our common enemy." In a clandestine meeting that brought Fry and Snow face to face with men who ought to have been their enemies, an unexpected offer appeared. A chance at an alliance unheard of in history. An alliance between the Empire and the Ultras. The Black Order were a secret organization working in the shadows, their goal to save as many humans as possible, not by fighting, but by yielding and going with the current. Their creed was simple. Demons are an enemy that cannot be fought head-on. They resisted, but never directly. In truth, the Black Order had never dared open battle. The one-time resistance happened was when Rank 19 Astaroth was killed. And even then, it was Gavid Lindemann who acted, not the Order itself. "Our aim is to save humans, to preserve their lives by every means we can. We fight in our own way." "For survival," Maria said. Their organization was not small. It included Lord Murgo himself and 2 of the Empyreans, though Lawrence wasn't a formal member, merely Murgo's retainer. All of this Fry Starlight took in, and after hearing the proposal, he simply smiled. "An alliance, then. It would be wonderful if it could happen," he said. Snow turned toward him, suspicion plain in his eyes. He wasn't about to trust the Ultras so easily. Fry continued anyway. "The war between the Empire and the Ultras has dragged on. It's become necessary to end it soon. If we keep on like this, one side will be wiped out by the end. But with an alliance, we might prevent that." He nodded, honestly liking the idea. "The true enemy is the demons, our one enemy, the foe we must fight. If we ally, we unite our strength and become far stronger than we are now. It's a great scenario." He nodded again, then his expression sharpened. "So? Tell me, Murgo, what's the condition?" He asked it out of nowhere, drawing curious looks. "Condition? Yes. You've said yourself you see us as hope for humanity, and we're the sort to wage war against the demons to the bitter end, even if that means challenging the high ranks and bringing calamities down on this planet. You, on the other hand, the Black Order, refuse to fight directly. That's an obvious conflict of interest." Murgo's smile broadened. "Quick on the uptake, aren't you, Fry Starlight? And yes, what you've just said is exactly right." He stepped forward and laid out his case. Fry Starlight, you're clever enough to grasp the present reality. You may think you'll win, since we Ultras lack anyone who can stand against you and your friend, but that way of thinking is completely wrong. In the end, the Empire's ruin is inevitable, no matter how fiercely you resist, because your enemy isn't human. It's demons, filthy, unfathomable demons. He sighed lightly, as if the very thought of the high demons forever lurking made him tired. My intent is sincere, Fry Starlight. I'm here to ally with you if possible, to unite our strength, and to save what can still be saved among the Empire's people. Fry answered, unconvinced. And how exactly do we save them if we don't fight? Murgo said what he'd come to say. At the rate this war is going, the moment you lose, the Empire will be annihilated, without exception. It will be a catastrophe that takes millions. But, Fry Starlight, you can avert that fate. He held out his hand. Submit to the demons. Surrender, and spare the worst. For yourself and for those close to you. You are very strong, and the same goes for Snow Lionheart. If you both submit, the demons will value you highly. You'll accomplish far more than I or Gavid Lindemann ever could. In other words, if Fry and Snow became demonic contractors and yielded completely, countless humans might be spared, given the worth of the two of them. Both possessed staggering potential. Submission to demons was hardly unprecedented. It had happened many times already. Not only among humans. The one who holds the 9th rank among the high demons. Nito isn't a demon at all, but of the pantheon. In other words, other races can enter the demon hierarchy even if they aren't demons. Given Frey's and Snow's power, they would be recognized and granted very high ranks. With that status, they could oversee Earth themselves, rather than the witch Beatrice, and save many lives. This, in brief, was the Black Order's best path to survival, conceived after witnessing what Fry and Snow, especially Fry, had accomplished. Neither Fry nor Snow looked impressed. This is your brilliant idea of survival? You call this fighting? All you've done is bow and simper, while humans keep dying every day. Yes, the Black Order had saved millions over the years, but for every human they saved among the Ultras, 100 others died. Your submission kept you out of direct conflict with the demons, but it turned you into their lab rats. Most of you died to demonic blood. From what you're saying, you want the Empire to do the same thing. Don't you? Fry chuckled. What a joke. To him, it was the dumbest thing they could do, and Snow agreed completely. I'd rather die torn to pieces on a battlefield than crawl and simper before filthy creatures who enjoy watching people die, Snow said, making his total opposition plain. Murgo let out a long, heavy sigh. I've been there, you know, in Helmont. Because he was half demon, he had spent his childhood in that hellish land, and in those few years there, he'd seen enough. Fry Starlight, I know my offer sounds pitiful to you, but believe me, this is the best we can do. His voice rose, unusual for him, as old memories surfaced. The Demon King, the 10 high ranks, the Duchy of Hell. Every one of them is a monster you can't predict and can't fight. Raising our swords against them is nothing but suicide. Instead of annihilation of our extinction, fighting from the shadows while yielding on the surface is far more merciful. Fry wasn't moved. If anything, he knew more about the demons and their king than Murgo did. It's too early to declare failure. We've only just begun to fight the demons. The battle with Zebar, the appearance of Geppetto, those were only the opening skirmishes of far harsher wars to come, and Fry intended to meet them all head-on. I appreciate the offer, Murgo, but I'd rather decide my fate with my own hands than leave it to others while I kneel and hope for their mercy. There was nothing for Fry and Snow to give Murgo but refusal. The old man tipped back his bottle and drank deep. Maria remained calm, unmoved by Frey's words. He kept an eye on her the whole time, testing for a hint of intent, but her face stayed perfectly cool, hiding everything. Maria was one of the main heroines of the novel Fry had once written. Like the others, she held vast potential. At some point, she was meant to change sides and aid Snow Lionheart. But with how things had shifted since Frey's arrival, that was no longer guaranteed. For a moment he thought it might happen now, given this talk of alliance. With his refusal, it seemed it wouldn't be any time soon. Murgo cut across Frey's thoughts. Fry Starlight, I doubt I can change your mind. Your resolve is clear and deep, beyond the reach of someone like me. But I must warn you, you're walking into your grave. Fry didn't so much as flinch. Let me worry about that. If death comes looking, I won't turn it away. Stubborn to the last. But so be it, Murgo said, then continued. Fry Starlight, let's make a wager, you and I. A simple one, you've nothing to lose. A wager? What kind? Murgo stepped forward. It's simple. As I've said, the war between the Empire and the Ultras is at its end. The final battle is close. Soon the main forces of both sides will clash, and the victor will decide everything. My wager is this. If the Empire's forces survive that battle and emerge victorious, I promise the Black Order and I will become your subordinates. But if you lose, you likely won't be killed. When that happens, I want you to join us yourself and carry out the proposal I've given you. A wager on the war's outcome, on who would stand and who would fall. Fry thought for a moment, then nodded calmly. Fine. In that case, we'll be enemies a while longer. Snow stepped up as well. Which means it'd be better to kill you now, wouldn't it? You're some of the Ultra's most important pieces. He was ready to strike at light speed and end them. Fry stopped him, and in the same instant, a strange surge of aura rippled over them all. Fry recognized it at once. Murgo's manipulation of space, the art that let him slip anywhere at will. This is the end of our meeting, Fry Starlight, Murgo said. Next time we'll be on the battlefield. I'll be looking forward to it, Fry replied. Murgo vanished with Maria and Lawrence, leaving Fry and Snow behind. As soon as the Ultras party disappeared, the place fell quiet and empty again. Staring at the spot where the old drunk had faded, both men kept silent for a while, until Snow scratched his hair, realizing something important. Did we come all this way for nothing? He glanced at Fry, who sighed, unable to deny it. I guess we did. An alliance with Murgo and his people would have been good for them. If they'd gained allies inside the Ultras, it could have strengthened their hand. A first-ever pact between the Empire and the Ultras, uniting all human power. It would have been ideal, humanity under one banner against the demons, as should have happened long ago. But, as usual, both sides failed to agree, and no alliance was made. At least we got something out of it, Fry said. If we win the next battle he mentioned, he and his organization will follow us of their own accord. He was thinking of the wager he'd made with Murgo. Snow looked doubtful. I'm not inclined to take his word for it. In the first place, if we do win, won't most of his organization be wiped out in the fighting anyway? Most likely. Leaving the meeting site, Fry and Snow moved off, putting enemy territory behind them. Look on the bright side. We at least learned they intend to end the war in the next battle. Fry went on. That's probably why they tried to finish us with their last strike. I can say clearly that someone like Gavid Lindemann was serious about it, at least. Unlike Gavid, many others weren't. And that was why the perfect trap the Ultras prepared felt more like theater than an extermination. If all the Ultras' forces were there, it means the other fronts are empty now. No reason for the Empire to keep its lines split. From here on, the forces would regroup and move as one, what was left of the Empire's army. When the war began, they'd had more than 100,000 soldiers. Fry wondered, how many are still alive, I wonder? Though the war's events had raced by, they'd been packed with life-and-death battles and mass slaughters. Not many, I'd say, Snow answered. At best, maybe a quarter, maybe less. With their numbers bleeding out and the Alliance chance gone, it seemed they'd have to rely on themselves again. Just as always. It's fine, Snow said. Even if we have to fight alone, we'll win no matter what. You and I. Fry nodded with a small smile. Yeah. As long as we fight together, we don't lose. Let's win this war, brother. As they withdrew, Fry didn't use long-range teleportation, giving the two of them a stretch of time away from the others to talk through what had to be done next. They were the only two who could stand if an SSS-class enemy appeared. The only two who knew much about the world's hidden truths and what lay above. There were things only they could discuss. And, ironically, neither of them was a normal human. One a light-bearer in human blood, the other a body remade beyond human limits. Even so, they had become humanity's last hope. And now they were on the verge of the final clash that would decide the war against the Ultras. Without their knowing, the countdown was nearly over. For a war that had dragged on too long and needed an end. Far from Fry and Snow, back among the Ultras, Murgo and the others reappeared from the void after their withdrawal. Lawrence, as always, stared blankly, caring little and understanding less. Maria stayed composed, her face unchanged, as if she'd expected this outcome. Murgo, on the other hand, looked uncharacteristically annoyed. He lifted his bottle for a swig and found it empty. "Damn it, I'm out." It was a familiar reaction whenever the old man ran dry. "Forget the drink," Maria said. "The alliance you wanted with Fry Starlight failed." Murgo waved her off, turning his back. Yeah. They're itching to fight and throw their lives away, and I can't talk them down." Between Fry, who wanted to fight to the death, and Murgo, who preferred submission to save what could be saved, their aims simply didn't match. "Fry Starlight and Snow Lionheart have no idea what they're walking into," Murgo muttered, kicking a stone aside. "They haven't seen what I've seen, or witnessed what I've witnessed." Fighting always sounded glorious. Fighting for freedom to break the demon's grip. But those were rosy dreams. The world we live in is only a fragment of something far larger. Its bounds unknown, its ceiling unseen. And even in that ignorance, they mean to fight. It's like challenging the heavens and expecting to win. He looked up at the sky. At the split moon Fry Starlight had carved himself. They're strong, truly strong. But compared to the horrors of Helmont, what do they hope to accomplish? Fry Starlight had barely scraped victory against a Zebar clone at half strength. Snow Lionheart hadn't even been able to touch Geppetto. He'd lost immediately to one of the corpses under Geppetto's control. In that case, what comes next? What if the 10th seat himself shows up? Worse, what if the enemy is a demon even stronger than the 10th? Murgo's mouth tightened into a hard line. The 4th of the high ranks, for example? Against an opponent like that, what exactly did Fry Starlight hope to achieve? "You're right," Maria said, and then added, "But he did win, didn't he?" Murgo turned to her. "What? He won. Against the 10th's clone. And even Snow Lionheart, though he lost, survived." Her crimson eyes gleamed. "They're evolving at a terrifying pace. What they've already done is what we used to call impossible. But they did it, and they still want to fight." "Maria," Murgo murmured, a faint scowl touching his face. "Don't tell me they've gotten to you. What, do you want to fight now?" He almost lost his voice for a moment. "Have you forgotten who we're up against? They're beings you can't escape. Not even after death." At that, Maria's expression shifted, barely. Her skin looked even paler than usual, as if it belonged to a corpse, not the living. "I know exactly who we're up against," she said, tilting the brim of her hat back over her white hair. "And I've never forgotten what they can do. But for now, I want to keep watching a little longer. See with my own eyes how far those two can go." Fry and Snow, were they the answer? Were they the ones who would achieve what the ancients could not? It was hard to say. But the next battle would be enough to give an answer and finally set the record straight. Those were Maria's thoughts Murgo clearly disliked. He turned to leave. "Do as you please. But do me a favor and brief the rest of Black Order. I've no desire to lecture them." Maria nodded, then asked, "Where are you going?" "To get my drink, of course. I can't live without it." Murgo walked away. Maria watched him for a time. "Your drink. That bottle he always carried. That isn't wine, is it?" Though Murgo had already gone some distance, his sharpened senses picked up her words. He didn't turn and he didn't answer. He just kept walking. Slowly, The whites of his eyes darkened, black creeping in until no white remained. Yes, yes, Maria, he whispered once he was far enough away. It was never wine. It was something else entirely. Clutching his head, Murgo sighed, raised the bottle, and slashed a deep cut across his own skin. Blood poured into the bottle, filling it. Murgo was drinking his own blood, through a ritual no one else understood. Only he knew why. If I don't drink, these damned voices won't stop pounding in my skull. Voices, echoes, black hands reaching for him from far away, trying to pull him back. Murgo, Lord of the Dark Hive. Half human, half demon. By all accounts ordinary. Despite his strength, he'd never stood out. But that wasn't true. Contrary to his words and the role he pretended to play, Murgo had always been exceptional. More than any other half-demon. Why? The reason was simple. Murgo, the old man heard a deep voice crash through him like thunder, heard it alone. He scowled, showing a rare flash of anger. How long do you plan to run from your fate? Murgo, the echo returned. Murgo drank his blood in greedy gulps, trying to drown it out. You can't run. My blood flows in your veins. The voice repeated itself, again and again, and Murgo kept drinking without pause. Murgo! This time the roar hit so hard Murgo sprang to his feet, his body trembling. He started to hallucinate. A demonic haze taking shape, with eyes burning a baleful red. A light that struck fear into the old drunk's heart. Marvas! Murgo breathed the name, stepping backward. Father! Whispering that shocking word, he tore the Ushighatana free and slashed the phantom with fury. Leave me alone, damn you! A savage cut ripped the ground apart. Murgo shuddered, then collapsed, raising the bottle again to gulp more of his own blood, driving the vision away. I have to resist, he muttered under his breath before staggering off. He had lived long and seen much, and so he knew better than anyone. Fighting demons was futile. He had seen their power for himself. Murgo, half demon, half human. A human mother, a demonic father. And that father, shockingly, was Marva's fifth among the high ranks, whose echo was beginning to spread across the earth. The universe is vast, and the world's ceiling reaches heights human minds can't grasp. There are countless secrets and hidden things, phenomena that defy understanding, scattered everywhere. Perhaps one of the darkest corners of creation is that bleak, desolate place with a blood-red sky and naked, barren ground. Helmont, the land of demons, where the demon king, Agaroth, presently resides. Helmont was a colossal planet, its mass dwarfing Earth's by at least dozens of times. A world the size of a star. That's how Helmont was often described. And yet, despite its immensity, most of it lay empty and still, drained long ago. Demons feed on life force. Aside from the strongest seats, who can persist without much of it, the weak desperately need to consume it. That hunger turned them into conquerors. Raiders of one world after another, dragging death behind them wherever they went. They are a long-lived race, multiplying quickly and in great numbers. They do not invade a single planet, but hundreds at a time. They reached even Earth, set out on the edge of the cosmos. Because of their constant campaigns, their home world was often left vacant. Yet one place on Helmont never slept. One place was always awake. Black ground, and upon it a city whose walls were forged of some sable metal, like an impregnable citadel raised to withstand anything an intruder could hurl at it. A fortress from another world. Encircling that fortress, a gigantic, impossible creature like a centipede of unimaginable length, so vast it girdled the entire city, coiling around it from every side. And at the very center, spearing the clouds and threatening to rip the sky itself, Tower of the End. The place that housed the strongest being in existence. The tower held 132 floors, and each floor told a story different from the last. Those tales will be told in time. Today, every gaze turned to the 129th floor. one of the most important floors of all and one that sits empty most of the time. It remains unused because it exists for a single purpose. Councils convened by the higher seats, the mightiest of the demons. On rare occasions, the king himself attends, though he has not done so in ages. Today was special. From within those iron walls came the heavy footfalls of a particular figure, a nightmare made flesh. A demon over 2 meters tall, older than any of his peers. Ash-gray hair. Eyes a deep, sinister red. Skin wrinkled, sagging, studded with repulsive growths that few could bear to look at for long. He wore a long black robe, and every step rolled out waves of pressure that stamped his presence onto the hall. Moments later, he reached the place set aside for the convocation he had been summoned to attend. Others had arrived before him. From the center of the chamber, a voice greeted him. The voice of one who presided here. The 5th seat, Lord Marvez, has arrived. The old demon was none other than the 5th seat, Marvez. The eldest among all the higher seats. Marvez's eyes swept the hall. It was exactly as he had left it. A vast chamber lit only by sparse candles set in scattered sconces, leaving the faces of the gathered scarcely visible. The single pool of full light fell upon the figure who had announced him. Another demon in simple garments of black and gray, hair the color of flame, face hidden behind a strange mask. Amon, Marvez spat, naming the demon before him. Welcome, Lord Marvez. Please take the place prepared for you. The nightmare will begin shortly, Amon said. Marvez took a few beats to study the chamber, measuring who had come, and who had not. The one he sought was absent. Has Weskier not arrived? He asked. None of the top 4 seats have come yet, Amon replied. At present, you are the highest seat in attendance. I see, Marvez muttered, then moved to the chair set aside for him. The seats circled a great throne erected at the most prominent point in the hall. The throne on which Agaroth would sit if he chose to appear. The nearer a seat's rank to the king, the closer their place was to that throne. As 5th, Marvez's station was relatively close compared to most. Settling into his place, he scanned the gathering again. This convocation was called the Nightmare. Amon, the host of the Nightmare, was ranked 11th among the higher seats. He was not one of the top 10, yet he had a weight and presence that even those above him observed with respect, abiding by his direction in these rites. From what Marvez could tell, most of the high ranks from his place down to the 15th seat were present. 15th was the minimum rank permitted to attend the Nightmare. Those below it were deemed unworthy. They would receive only a summary later from their betters. Well now, isn't this the old Marvez? A sultry voice teased from his right. He turned toward a nearby seat and found a woman of unsettling charm lounging there. An elegant black dress embroidered with thorned red roses, a decorated hat set above fiery red hair. Izalith, he said, the 7th seat, bearer of the king's blood soul, and the strongest sorceress among the demons. She was the very mentor from whom Beatrice had learned all she knew of magic, an affinity made plain by the many similarities between them. Marvez was plainly displeased to speak with her. She stood on Weskier's side, not his. No need for all that hostility, old man. You haven't changed, even after all these years. I've nothing to say to you except that I'm surprised to see you here. The war against the ghouls is still underway. That's true. But I can't stay away and miss a nightmare. Izalith's smile deepened. It's the first time the 1st seat himself has called for the convocation. The nightmare is a right only one of the top 5 seats. Or the king can convene. This was the first time Crimson had done so. The 1st seat's summons was weighty enough that Izalith left the ghoul front, where number 3 of the 7 great powers was present, and came immediately just to attend. You're the oldest among us, Marvez, and the most seasoned. Why do you think the 1st upper would call this meeting? Marvez closed his eyes. I've no idea. Crimson hasn't stirred from his place since the king withdrew from the world. It was the first movement from the 1st seat after a long dormancy. Perhaps he means to address the 6th seat's disgraceful defeat. Your faction brought us shame, Marvez said. opening fire at Izalith and Weskir's black faction. The Blood Witch was unmoved. You can't fault him. His opponent was number 2 of the 7 great powers, the Lord of Light himself. They were speaking of an incident on the planet Launder, where the 6th seat, the Lord of Graves. Asmodeus faced the Lord of Light, Orsted, who appeared from nowhere. Their battle was catastrophic, and Asmodeus could not escape Orsted. Though the demon bore Agarotha's death soul, it wasn't enough to overcome the Lord of Light. It happened around the time Fry traveled to Launder and first uncovered the truth of Nameless. And though Asmodeus's body was annihilated, he did not die. He survived by invoking the Death Soul's power at the very end, forcing fate to spare him. He had since returned in another vessel, but his strength had fallen sharply, and recovery would take a long time. In his current state, he was far weaker than the other top 10 seats. Asmodeus's defeat is no small matter, Marvez allowed. But I doubt the first seat would summon us all for that alone. Crimson didn't care much for such affairs. Agaroth was all that concerned him. Perhaps it concerns the king, Marvez said. Izalith fell silent. She didn't deny it. So, what had happened with the king to make the first call them all? As the two spoke, Amon's voice rose again from the center of the hall. The 3rd seat has arrived, Lady Vane. At the sound of her name, the chamber fell still again. The very air grew darker, an aftereffect of the bearer of the king's shadow entering. A demoness with violet hair, pallid skin, and 4 horns crowning her head. Vane glided in without acknowledging anyone, not even Amon, and took her seat without ceremony. She did not so much as glance at Marvez, which pricked his pride. Izalith noted it clearly. Though Marvez masked his expression well, her witch's eyes saw much. Vane has always done whatever she pleases, Izalith murmured. No need to take her too hard. She can do as she likes. I've no interest in a filthy beast like her. Oh? Because of how much she resembles Weskir, perhaps. A faint change crossed Marvez's face, and Izalith laughed softly. She'd struck the truth. Weskir and Vane were very alike, because they were siblings. Weskir was the younger. The Blood Witch kept trading words with Marvez despite their opposing camps. He never outright rejected her. Among demons, Izalith was one of the few he respected. She was the most active on the battlefield, and had led the legions to many victories. Marvez favored her kind, and had regretted greatly when she chose to side with Weskir. Let me tell you something juicy, Marvez, about our friend Vane, Izalith said, hopping playfully from her 7th seat to Asmodeus's empty 6th, just to sit beside him. She leaned close and whispered in the old demon's ear. I hear Vane faced an opponent who frightened her so badly she fled, and shut herself away for months. Marvez's brows knit. An opponent that would make the 3rd seat run? She who once crossed blades with Orsted as an equal? What nonsense are you spouting? Only number 1 of the 7 great powers. Mitter could kill her for certain, and even he shouldn't have sent her running. The other possibility was the inscrutable Great Ones, but they rarely meddled in worldly affairs. Marvez couldn't place the foe Izalith meant. She didn't know for certain either, but she had a very strong suspicion. In a voice gone heavy, she named him. It was Nameless. The name nearly jolted Marvez from his seat. He could scarcely believe it. Nameless? That's impossible. Marvez almost sprang from his seat. I'm well aware of what's happening on the human world, he went on. I've already heard a look-alike has appeared there. But there's a world of difference between Nameless and that greenhorn. He was speaking of Fry, of course. Nameless was one of a kind. A strange, affectless creature who devoted his entire existence to knowledge and training, reaching tiers of power no one but he and the king ever touched. His sword was a reaper's scythe, and fighting him was pure hell, so much so that even the high seats fled his path. Glimmers of a distant past flickered through Marvez's mind. He was one of the oldest demons. He had seen much, and Nameless Rise was one of those things. Against an enemy like that, all I have is fear. And respect. Are you telling me he's returned? Izalith nodded. He has. I can confirm it. Truly? Marvez covered his face with one hand, trying to process it. I watched the king kill him with my own eyes. As did I, Izalith replied. But as you know, certain beings toy with life and death. You can't judge them by common measures. She relayed the full report Beatrice had sent her, each detail deepening Marvez's shock. So, that human you believe is Nameless defeated a half-strength copy of Zebar. Izalith inclined her head. That's right. I see. Silence lingered while Marvez connected the threads. At last he understood why Weskier had shut himself in on Earth all this time, all for the sake of a single human. A human who might harbor the power of a being that once crossed blades as an equal with his king. While I was busy with wars and conquests, that damned Weskier had his eyes on something else entirely. Irritated, Marvez clicked his tongue. Since the king's seclusion. And the first seats as well, with the second and third refusing leadership. Weskier had been Marvez's direct rival for command. But it was never a fair contest. Weskier possessed the king's eye, which handed him advantage after advantage, always a step ahead. Marvez bore the king's dark soul, among the mightiest souls in existence. But its use was largely confined to the battlefield. One-on-one, Marvez was sure he could beat Weskier. Even so, Agaroth had set Weskier above him in the order, power aside. It had always gnawed at the oldest demon. A quiet insult he dared not contest. The king's word was absolute. Beyond reverence, they had only fear and total obedience for Agaroth. While Marvez weighed his next move regarding the now sensitive humans, Amon's voice cut through the hall again. The second high seat has arrived. Lord Agar's. All eyes turned to the monster stepping into the light. Marvez's most of all, narrowing with a tangle of feelings. Agar's. The second, a demon as tall as Marvez, with cool blue hair and pale skin like Vain's. His frame wasn't massive, but everyone knew that unassuming body was the toughest in the room. Marvez knew it better than most. In the far past, Agar's had challenged him for his rank. Marvez had been superior then, yet he lost badly and surrendered his seat. The second bore the king's hardness, his flesh akin to Agaroth's own durability, making him a monster of overwhelming physical might. Even the first, Crimson, lagged in that regard and relied on the blood armor to compensate. I didn't expect he'd really come, Izalith murmured, studying him from afar. He vanished after losing to Mitter, the dragon god, the first of the 7 great powers. Looks like that defeat cut deep, but here he is again. Even so, Agar's looked anything but pleased. His mood was foul, like he was ready to tear someone apart at once. Long ago he had confronted Mitter of the Pantheon, and suffered a crushing defeat. 2 things made it humiliating. First, he lost a contest of endurance and toughness. His own specialty. Against the Pantheon's strongest. Second, it hadn't even been a true one-on-one. Agar's had intervened to save the 9th high seat, Nito, who'd fallen into Mitter's hands. Nito was no demon, he too was of the Pantheon. He betrayed them, long ago, revealing their weakness to Agaroth. Nito had been very strong. The Pantheon boasts the dragon god, Mitter, and beneath him stand 2 dragon emperors. Nito was one of them. Because he wasn't a demon, Agaroth granted him the light soul, which vaulted his power even higher. Even so, Mitter utterly destroyed him, and even with Agar's aid they couldn't prevail, cementing the dragon god's fearsome repute. Without the king or the first moving, the Pantheon would remain unshaken. Nito's over there, Izalith added, amused. He hasn't said a word, and he's avoiding Agar's as much as he can. How deliciously awkward. The relationships between the high demons were strange. They never truly looked like allies. More like a collection of monsters forced to coexist by power and circumstance. Still, that didn't change the fact that this gathering contained some of the most terrifying entities to ever exist in this world. Seeing Agar's here only confirms it. The nightmare will bring something earth-shaking this time, Marvez muttered. anticipating the moment the first would arrive and reveal the reason for summoning them all, and what kind of news could be important enough to gather every high seat. It seems there's still some time before that, Izalith noted. I doubt Crimson will appear until every ranked seat is present. I suppose you're right. In the meantime, Izalith said, a sly curve at her lips, why don't we talk about you a little, Lord Marvez? The fifth's crimson eyes flicked toward her in suspicion. I've heard, she went on, that you still haven't surpassed your training phase. Could it be that you've reached your limit? Marvez's expression darkened instantly. Careful, Izalith. I enjoy our conversations, but know your boundaries. Ah, forgive me, she said lightly, realizing how much that subject irritated him. Marvez, the oldest of all demons, had remained trapped in the same stage for ages. The fifth stage of the SSS class. The curse of immortality. A mysterious realm few ever reached. But once mastered and surpassed, the reward was immense. A body overflowing with endless power and eternal life. Flesh that no longer aged. A form preserved forever at its peak. Strength that defied decay itself. The fifth stage had always been the wall. Only Vayne and Agars had broken through to the sixth. And Crimson, the first, had pierced the seventh. No one else had gone beyond the fifth. Among them, Marvez had lingered there the longest. Weskier too was at that same stage, but the difference between them was vast. The fourth wasn't even trying in earnest. He was too consumed by his schemes and twisted plans. Yet he'd reached the same height as Marvez, who had devoted his entire existence to battle and training. For a moment it seemed Marvez was stronger than Weskier, but anyone perceptive enough knew the truth. If Weskier ever tried in earnest, truly tried, his power would even eclipse his sister Vayne's. Well, Lord Marvez, Izalith continued, tone silky, the reason I brought this up, despite knowing how rude it sounds, is that I might have found a way to help you break through. That made Marvez raise an eyebrow. Oh? And what trick do you think you've discovered? A method to transcend the wall? She was claiming something he'd sought for centuries. The idea irritated him, yet he knew the blood which didn't speak without reason. The method, she said smoothly, is to challenge the law of life and death itself. Anyone who understands those laws and learns to command them will never struggle to transcend this phase. Marvez frowned. And how, exactly, do you expect me to challenge life and death? Even the king doesn't fully command those laws. That's simple. Izalith leaned in, whispering near his ear. You don't have to do it yourself. You just need help from someone who already has, and as it happens, we have just the right being for that. At her words, Marvez's eyes lit up. Maskith. Exactly. Izalith nodded, pleased. Maskith. A strange entity of unknown origin one Agaroth was fond of conversing with. The king had given him a place in Helmont, making him one of the Dukes of Hell. Maskith was eccentric, the one who had invented the demon seed. An experiment that defied the laws of life and death themselves. With his help, Marvez might indeed be able to break through. That was the possibility Izalith hinted at. I don't understand, Marvez said warily. Why tell me this when you serve Weskier? Izalith chuckled softly. Regardless of our differences, we're still on the same side. Don't forget that. Making you stronger benefits us all in the coming wars. She smiled, then added, her eyes glinting with amusement. Besides, it'll make things far more interesting this way. Her last words revealed her true intent far more than the first. The blood which was as twisted as her pupil. Perhaps even worse. Weskier currently had every advantage, especially after uncovering the truth about Nameless and weaving his web among the ever-evolving humans. Compared to him, Marvez seemed to be falling behind, so she decided to give him a push, to keep the balance, and she seemed to be enjoying every second of it. Maskith. A strange entity of unknown origin one Agaroth was fond of conversing with. The king had given him a place in Helmont, making him one of the Dukes of Hell. Maskith was eccentric, the one who had invented the demon seed. an experiment that defied the laws of life and death themselves. With his help, Marvas might indeed be able to break through. That was the possibility Izalith hinted at. "I don't understand," Marvas said warily. "Why tell me this when you serve Weskier?" Izalith chuckled softly. "Regardless of our differences, we're still on the same side. Don't forget that. Making you stronger benefits us all in the coming wars." She smiled, then added, her eyes glinting with amusement, "Besides, it'll make things far more interesting this way." Her last words revealed her true intent far more than the first. The blood which was as twisted as her pupil. Perhaps even worse. Weskier currently had every advantage, especially after uncovering the truth about Nameless and weaving his web among the ever-evolving humans. Compared to him, Marvas seemed to be falling behind. So she decided to give him a push. To keep the balance. And she seemed to be enjoying every second of it. The Summit of the Nightmare. The name fit it perfectly. A catastrophic event that gathered the demonic monstrosities whose very presence brought death and ruin wherever they went. One by one, the high seats arrived, each step shaking the foundations of the abyss. After the second seat, Agaris entered, the rest followed swiftly until every seat was filled, all except the first, who had yet to appear. At the center of the hall stood the masked Amon, the 11th seat, commanding the room like a conductor before an orchestra of calamities. Each being present was a disaster in their own right. Second seat, Agars, the tyrant. Third seat, Evane, the catastrophe. Fourth seat, Weskier, the scholar. Fifth seat, Marvas, the general. Sixth seat, Asmodeus, the lord of graves. Seventh seat, Izalith, the blood queen. Eighth seat, Yosefka, the cannibal. Ninth seat, Nito, the betrayer. 10th seat, Zebar, the one-man army. And of course, others like Amon, 11, and Geppetto, 13. Even Weskier himself was there. He wouldn't dare ignore a summons from the first. Every one of them had abandoned their battles, conquests, and obsessions to answer this call, an order that weighed heavily upon them. None knew what Crimson had in store, and that silence was almost unbearable. As time crawled on, tension thickened in the air, especially between the 4th and 5th. Marvas had always despised Weskier, and the latter knew exactly how to exploit that. The king's eye moved by its own whims, driven by schemes that only Weskier understood, but those whims always led to greatness. What everyone had thought to be Weskier's disappearance for trivial games on Earth turned out to be something far greater. He had been hunting Nameless and the remnants of his cult who survived to this day. That revelation made his long absence entirely justified, leaving Marvas with nothing to say. Once again, the 4th had outplayed him. Zebar, too, was present, but vastly different from the version Fry Starlight had fought. Clad in the towering Katarina armor and radiating his full, genuine aura, he now emanated power and menace far beyond that half-strength clone. The division between factions was clear as daylight. The 6th, 7th, and 10th sided with Weskier, while the 8th and 9th, and most ranks between 11 and 15 followed Marvas. Amon alone remained neutral. It was no surprise that hostility hung heavy in the air. Ever since the king's seclusion, the two sides had clashed endlessly for dominance over demonkind. Then, just as the tension reached its breaking point, Amon's voice struck through the silence like a thunderclap. "The first seat has arrived, Lord Crimson." At those words, all gazes turned as the red moon itself stepped into the hall. Clad in the blood armor, the Slayer of Kings gripped in his right hand, Crimson advanced step by step, each one sending crushing waves of pressure through the room. The force was unbearable. Even the strongest unleashed their auras just to remain standing. And amid that storm of power, Weskier laughed. "So this is the king's aura." Crimson had always been different. Special. Unlike the rest, who could endure only one of Agarotha's world-shattering abilities, Crimson possessed several, and bore them effortlessly. This presence, the aura of the king, was one of them. The first seat, Crimson, wields an aura equal to King Agaroth himself, and his reserve of power matches as well. That fact alone was terrifying. Never mind his other abilities. It was clear he existed on an entirely different plane. Even Agar's, the indomitable second, wasn't his equal. Standing in the center of the hall, Crimson drove his great spear into the ground, his gaze sweeping over the assembly. Amon quietly withdrew to his designated seat, leaving the first complete command. And thus Crimson began the meeting. "I see you are all here, my fellow demons." His deep voice resonated through the iron hall, carved by centuries of restraint. As he paced slowly, his piercing eyes, an overwhelming aura, seemed to stab through each of them in turn. "How many years has it been?" he said, pulling his spear free from the floor. "Hundreds? Thousands?" It had indeed been ages since Crimson had withdrawn from the world. All that time, he had stood as the gatekeeper of Agaroth, guarding the sealed path to his king with absolute, unshakable loyalty. "It's been a long time indeed," he continued. "Yet your faces haven't changed at all." His words, at first, sounded like acknowledgement, but what followed stripped them of all warmth. "That's pitiful." The mockery in his tone cut deep. "Has the world become so peaceful that you no longer fear for your lives, my brothers and sisters in darkness?" He stepped closer, and the pressure intensified again. Emotionless, his voice remained cold as steel, but it was clear Crimson was far from pleased. For though the high seats hadn't fallen for millennia, they hadn't achieved anything remarkable either. The age of wars had ended. There were no longer many battles of life and death. The demons still waged their conquests upon other races. But their pace had slowed to a crawl, and they were no longer the harbingers of annihilation they once were. "In that case," Crimson said, his voice laced with mockery, "why don't I slaughter you all myself and save us the trouble?" A suffocating killing intent erupted from him, so overwhelming that every high seat instantly rose from their thrones, their instincts screaming in alarm. Crimson laughed, the sound echoing through the steel chamber like thunder. "Excellent. At least your combat senses haven't dulled." With a twisted grin stretching across his face, he spun the Kingslayer in his hand. "Let's see then. What do the 10 seats have left to show me?" His voice boomed through the hall as he swung the spear, and in that moment, a crimson catastrophe exploded from its blade. In a single motion, the world turned blood-red. Those gathered were engulfed by the sheer, maddening force of the first seat's might. With one swing alone, the 12th through 15th seats were obliterated. Only the top 10 and Amon survived, barely managing to deflect the attack. Sensing the danger closing in, 3 demons lunged forward at once, surrounding Crimson. Agar's, the second, charged from the front, while Zebar and Marvas flanked him from both sides. Marvas summoned the great armor Morgul, coating his body in a massive layer of defense, while Zebar activated the dreadful Katarina armor. Both were weapons of mass destruction, fortifying their endurance beyond reason. Fitting for the 2 strongest defenders alongside Agar's. Crimson, however, ignored the devastating strikes from Marvas and Zebar, blows that could have annihilated even an SSS-class being, and focused solely on Agar's, the strongest among them after himself. Agar's fist ignited with a thick, viscous aura of darkness, his toughness surpassing the very laws of the world. That fist collided with Crimson's Kingslayer, now burning with a fierce scarlet aura. The impact was apocalyptic, so violent that Marvas and Zebar were sent hurtling backward, crushed by the shockwave. Their attacks had struck true, yet Crimson's blood armor absorbed every ounce of damage without effort. As Agar's and Crimson's powers clashed, the first began to laugh again, low and menacing. "What's wrong, brother?" he taunted. "Is this the king's hardness you boast so proudly of?" His eyes glowed, his entire body igniting in seething crimson light. A torrent of aura burst outward like a storm, engulfing Agar's completely. "If that's all you've got," Crimson's voice thundered, "then how utterly disappointing." Boom! A roaring crimson explosion tore through the hall, launching Agar's like a meteor. He crashed through the ground, skidding across the desolate surface for miles until his body finally came to a stop, blood spilling from his knuckles. The very fist said to rival the king's durability had been wounded. Gritting his teeth, Agar's roared and leapt back toward the battlefield. By then, every remaining high seat had charged in together, and Crimson stood alone, laughing, his terrifying grin widening as he raised the Kingslayer once more. Come then, all of you. And thus began a cataclysmic battle, a clash so fierce it shook the very foundation of Helmont itself. The true beginning of the nightmare. Without warning, without mercy, the first seat, Crimson, appeared before the other high seats, attacking them head-on and promising a hell they hadn't experienced in ages. Every one of the demons present stood among the strongest beings in existence, warriors at the very peak of the world's power hierarchy. There were few, if any, who could rival them. For fighters of that level, no words were needed, no questions asked. The sheer killing intent and ominous aura radiating from Crimson told them everything. He was serious. He meant to kill them all. And he had already proven it when he annihilated seats 13 through 15 with a single swing. A terrifying scene few in the cosmos could ever replicate. At once, the remaining high seats launched into battle, clashing with Crimson in full force. From behind, Weskier observed the chaos, his face darkened by a rare frown. Why? Why would Crimson try to kill us all? It made no sense. There was no logic, no reason. And what unsettled him most, more than Crimson's madness, was that the king's eye could not see through this future. While Agar's, Marva's, and Zebar fought him head-on, Weskier analyzed every movement, every wave of power. Something is blocking my vision, blocking the king's eye itself. A force clashing directly with a world-breaking ability, an impossibility. Crimson was terrifying, yes. He possessed multiple world-breaking powers. But none of them involved causality manipulation. He couldn't, by nature, obstruct Weskier's divine sight. And yet Weskier couldn't see anything. The future, destiny, everything beyond this point was sealed to him. That could only mean one thing. There was only one being capable of suppressing the king's eye. Impossible. His voice trembled with disbelief. Is he doing this under the king's command? The thought alone sent a chill through him. It made no sense, but it explained everything. If Agaroth, the demon king himself, had ordered Crimson to purge them, then everything fell into place. Crimson never acted on his own will. He had remained at the king's side for centuries. Eternal, silent, devoted. If the demon king had indeed commanded extermination, then it was Agaroth's own hand blocking Weskier's sight. The realization twisted Weskier's expression into fury. But why would he do something like this? Manipulating the waves, Weskier raised his hand. And the skies of Helmont darkened, unleashing black rain that poured upon Crimson as he finally joined the battle. The other high seats followed suit, and once they all released their full power, Helmont itself began to collapse. Crimson was a true monster. Only Agar's could match him head-on, and even then, not for long. Every other high seat combined their might, each wielding a world-breaking ability granted by Agaroth himself. But even so, Crimson's blood armor remained untouchable. An artifact of ancient power that absorbed all attacks, converting incoming damage into raw offensive strength. It was impervious to both magic and wave manipulation, rendering most of their attacks useless. That changed when Izalith intervened. Channeling the blood spirit she carried within her, the Blood Queen smiled faintly. The blood armor, Crimson, don't forget, it lives up to its name. As long as there is blood, I hold the upper hand. At her command, the blood armor's absolute defense began to falter. Meanwhile, Crimson's weapon, the Kingslayer, was both spear and sword depending on how he wielded it. It allowed him to fight across every range, and its terrifying ability was the power to cut aura itself. Each swing struck both physically and spiritually. Every strike from the Kingslayer carved away vast portions of his enemy's energy, delivering spiritual wounds that could not be blocked or healed. To counter this, Yosefka the cannibal joined the front lines, supporting Agar's and the others. Thanks to the demon spirit granted to her by Agaroth, Yosefka's twisted soul could not be cut by the Kingslayer. Her warped essence rendered Crimson's weapon ineffective, blunting his most devastating offense. Through their coordination, the combined might of 2 of the 10, they managed to suppress his ultimate weapons. And yet, Crimson still had the upper hand. His aura alone, equal to the Demon King's, overwhelmed them. His techniques were endless, each more monstrous than the last. The crimson aura swirling around him seemed to have risen straight from hell itself. To resist it, it took the world-breaking shadows of Vayne, the wave control of Weskier, and the dark spirit of Marvez, all combined in perfect harmony, while Agars and Zebar pressed him physically, blow after blow. Finally, Nito, the Ninth, unleashed his spirit of light, an element inherently lethal to demons. His attacks pierced Crimson's defenses mercilessly. With his armor nullified, Crimson was struck again and again, his form battered under their united assault. The clash only grew fiercer by the second. Even though the high seats gained the upper hand, the gap was razor-thin. Crimson alone kept up with all of them, and that realization chilled them to the core. He truly was the pinnacle. It had always been said, Crimson was born to be the next Demon King. His potential defied nature itself. Only Agaroth had ever surpassed him. And now, Crimson had grown far beyond what anyone imagined. His power encroaching upon the realm of the Great Ones themselves. The same plane once reached by Agaroth and the being known as Nameless, whom Crimson had fought eons ago. That was the might of the first seat. None understood why he had launched this catastrophic assault. But even as their world fell apart around them, the high seats felt not hatred, but awe, fear, respect, reverence. They wanted answers. But survival came first, and so they fought him with everything they had. In the end, their combined strength prevailed. Vayne's shadows crawled across Crimson's skin, Agars's fists shattered his armor, and wounds tore through his body. Bleeding, still laughing, Crimson stood to the last moment, until the high seats unleashed a final, united strike that buried him deep beneath the black soil of Helmont. An explosion so immense followed, it shook the entire planet to its core. They all hovered around the edge of a colossal crater. The scar left by their last, desperate strike. Peering into its depths, they thought it over. This was the grave of the first seat, Crimson. No one, no matter how strong, could possibly stand against all of them at once. To fight that many world-breaking beings was sheer madness. That's what they believed, until they realized how gravely mistaken they were. From the void below, an ominous force began to crawl upward, thick and suffocating. A strange phenomenon unfolded, one that filled even the high seats with dread. Above them, a massive crimson moon rose from the darkness, descending closer and closer until its blood-red glow swallowed them whole. The sky itself turned scarlet, and an unnatural aura spread through the air. In that instant, many of them understood what they were witnessing. "This is," Weskier whispered, eyes widening. A technique said to have been created by Crimson himself, one that even impressed the Demon King. "The Red Domain." Weskier spoke the name, and from the depths of the inferno, a voice answered. "That's right." From within the crater of destruction, Crimson emerged once more, unharmed, untouched, reborn in the very heart of ruin. But he was no longer the same. Every ability that the high seats had struggled so hard to suppress had fully reawakened. Sensing this, they attacked at once, but this time it was useless. Crimson toyed with them, dismantling their defenses and crushing them one after another. "You now stand inside my red domain," Crimson declared, his voice echoing in their skulls like the whisper of death itself. "I'm sure you all understand what that means. Within the red domain, he was God. Here, I can nullify the inevitability of any power used against me." Crimson continued, his tone calm but absolute. And I control the aura of this space. Everything within my domain belongs to me. The red domain, Agaroth himself had called it the strongest defensive ability he had ever seen. It could repel anything, even a strike carrying the full might of the Demon King. That was what made Crimson truly untouchable. He had pulled them all into his world, a realm where every world-breaking ability they possessed became useless. And if that meant anything, it was this. Crimson's power had surpassed even the gifts they'd once received from Agaroth himself. Now, completely invincible, with all his weapons and abilities restored to perfection, the battlefield shifted once more. And what followed was hell. Crimson overwhelmed them utterly, reducing the high seats, once the apex of demonkind, to prey. The moment they realized how hopeless the situation had become was when Crimson shattered Zebar, annihilating the 10th seat entirely. Zebar was the first to fall. Then the others followed. One by one, they fought with desperation, fury, pride. But it meant nothing. The first seat had ascended to the level of the Demon King Agaroth himself, and the ancient being nameless before him. Against such a presence, against such power, they never stood a chance. They fell one after another until only Agar's, Weskir, and Marva's remained. Agar's endured through sheer hardness. Marva's survived beneath the Morgul armor. And Weskir evaded destruction by manipulating the waves themselves. Crimson chuckled approvingly. Well fought, my brothers. But now, let's end this. Raising his spear, the Kingslayer, the air itself began to shudder. The crimson moon above swelled to an impossible size. And then it exploded, a spectacle beyond imagination. The giant red moon burst apart into clouds of scarlet stardust that streamed toward Crimson, gathering, spiraling, condensing into the spear in his hand. This was the ultimate technique of the red domain. Its entire reality converted into a single final strike, a blow that could erase anything. Before that power, Agar's, Weskir, and Marva's had no chance. Crimson released the attack. And in an instant the blast consumed them, erasing miles upon miles of Helmont's surface, and marking the end of the 10 high seats, all but one. Descending slowly amid the cataclysmic ruin, Crimson landed upon the scorched ground, victorious, sovereign, supreme. But then, clap, a strange sound echoed through the silence. Clap, 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 applause. A voice emerged from the void, smooth and amused. Magnificent performance. Crimson's expression shifted. Without hesitation, the first seat dropped to one knee, bowing in reverence and devotion to the being who had spoken. The nightmare had reached its true conclusion, and the secret behind it all lay in the hands of the monster who had just appeared. After the earth-shattering battle that saw the first seat, Crimson, annihilate every other high seat, the world of Helmont lay in ruin. Its surface fractured, its air burning red beneath the expanse of the red domain. Now, Crimson knelt upon one knee amid the silence, as the sound of applause echoed across the desolation, filling the void left by the war. The clash between Crimson and the upper demons had utterly destroyed Helmont. His domain had spread across vast distances, bringing complete devastation to the dead world. The first seat's power existed on a level beyond comprehension, far surpassing even what it had been before he ceased fighting to serve at Agaroth's side. Clad in his crimson armor, his long red hair flowing like fire, Crimson looked every bit the image of royalty, a monster draped in the regality of annihilation. And yet this mighty being now knelt before another presence greater still. A marvelous performance. The voice rang softly, intimately, as though it whispered directly into Crimson's ear. Yet its source sat far, far away. In the distance, the shape of a dark cloud flickered into view. Two red eyes glimmered through the void. One of them the king's eye, the eye that saw fate and all possible futures. There was no mistaking who it was. The devourer of all. The king of demons. The great one. Agaroth. He had been present from the beginning, silently observing the battle between Crimson and the rest of the high seats. But aside from Crimson, and perhaps Weskier, who had sensed something, none of the others had realized that the Demon King himself had been watching. Agaroth seemed pleased, impressed by the spectacle his first seat had delivered. "Let us set things right," he murmured. With a mere flick of his hand, the king's dark fingers shimmered, rippling the air. That ripple spread outward, expanding, until it erupted as a wave that swept through the battlefield in every direction. Reality itself shattered, like glass breaking into 1,000 pieces. And then, in the next heartbeat, came the impossible. The ruined wasteland vanished. The battlefield was gone. The sky cleared. The ground rebuilt itself. Cracks sealed, craters disappeared, and the nightmare hall reformed around the throne where Agaroth now sat. Moments later, 14 figures materialized from nothingness. The high seats, from the 2nd to the 15th, each standing once more, alive and whole, confusion written across their faces. What just happened? They all muttered the same words at once. Seconds ago, they had been fighting Crimson, and losing horribly. His red domain had crushed them beyond recovery. They had died. There was no doubt of it. So how were they alive? Kneeling before them, Crimson's eyes flared a blinding red as he spoke, his voice thunderous and commanding. "The king stands before you. How dare you avert your gaze?" The sheer weight of his aura crashed down like a tidal wave. At once, every demon turned their eyes toward the throne, toward the being seated upon it. The dim light of the candles faltered further in his presence. The shadows deepened. Only the glow of his crimson eyes illuminated the hall now. And when the high seats finally beheld him with their own eyes, their bodies gave out. They collapsed to the floor in unison, prostrating before the throne. Unlike Crimson, who knelt like a knight before his lord, the others pressed their foreheads to the ground, unable even to lift their heads. Not because they chose to, but because they couldn't. The presence of Agaroth was unlike anything else. Even with his vast, crushing aura restrained, its sheer gravity bound them completely. He had been sitting behind them all along, yet none had sensed him until Crimson's words made them aware. Now that they had seen him, the truth of his presence was unbearable. It was often said that Crimson's aura matched the king's own, and that was true, but the difference was profound. Crimson's presence was immense, terrifying. Agaroth's, however, was otherworldly. Something beyond all reason and comprehension, a power that exuded an unfathomable terror, as if the universe itself bent beneath it. Crimson was a monster, but the being before them was the very concept of fear itself. As they knelt, thoughts raced through the minds of the high seats. The Demon King was here. The being who had secluded himself since the war against Nameless, unseen for eons, was now in their presence right after their battle with Crimson. They tried to understand what was happening, especially Weskier, the 4th seat. Was what just happened one of the king's abilities? He wondered. Did he reverse time? Observing the surroundings through the king's eye, Weskier quickly denied the thought. No, time never reversed. It never even paused. The king possesses no temporal powers. Reversing time is impossible. His eye did not merely see fate. It perceived the flows of aura and the distortion of energy in perfect clarity. Since the battle with Crimson, time had continued normally, and the remnants of their unleashed power still lingered in the air. That meant the king hadn't altered time at all. What he had done was something else entirely. Something beyond comprehension, and no matter how hard Weskier tried to discern it, he couldn't, nor could any of the others. All they knew was that Agaroth had done something that restored them completely. He had brought them back from death itself, as if nothing had ever happened. None of them could understand what he had done, and that only made the king seated before them all the more terrifying, all the more unfathomable. Now, with Agaroth and Crimson present together in one place, the very air grew suffocating. Even the weaker high seats, such as the 14th and 15th, trembled under the crushing weight of their combined presence, barely managing to stay on their feet. After a short, tense silence in which none dared to speak before their king, Agaroth himself broke it. "This place hasn't changed since the last time I saw it." His deep voice echoed through the nightmare hall as his crimson eyes swept slowly across the chamber, the same throne room that had been built for him in the earliest days of his reign. Turning his gaze toward the high seats, he continued, "And neither have you." A brief pause, then, correcting himself, "No, that applies only to the first 11. The rest have changed since the last time I was here." Indeed, unlike the first 11 seats who had survived through millennia, the others had long been replaced. The lesser ranks had fallen, some slain in wars against other races, others devoured or erased in ways unspoken. Agaroth dismissed the thought with a faint gesture. "No matter, let us begin the nightmare." At his words, every demon took their seat once more. For the first time since his arrival, they were permitted to speak. Some wished to praise their king's glory, but all knew he despised flattery. So it was Marvaz, the oldest among them, who dared to ask the question burning in everyone's mind. "My king, forgive my insolence, but what happened to us? And why did the first seat attempt to kill us? Why that massacre? And how were they still alive?" Agaroth ignored the second question entirely, revealing nothing about his mysterious power. But he did answer the first. "Crimson has been absent from battle for far too long," the king said evenly. "He wished to remember the feeling of combat before returning to activity. So I granted him that request." The hall went silent. That single statement revealed everything they needed to know. The first seat was returning to active duty. Those words alone carried weight beyond measure. Crimson, who had withdrawn from the world since Agaroth's retreat, had never once interfered in worldly affairs. His reemergence could only mean one thing: the balance of power was about to collapse. The factions led by Marvaz and Westgear would soon crumble. Leadership would revert entirely to Crimson. No one, not Agars, not Gale of the Infernal Duchy, could hope to stand against him. But why now? Why had Crimson returned at this moment after all this time? To that, Crimson himself answered. "Some of you already know," he began, rising slowly from one knee, his armor glinting under the faint crimson light. "This world we live in is changing." He paused, his voice deep and measured. "We are on the verge of confronting the unknown. Soon, our steps will tread upon a foreign land, one no being truly understands." At these words, several of the high seats exchanged glances, their eyes lighting with recognition. They knew what he meant. This was the turning point of the Nightmare Conference. One that would be remembered in history. The first to discover it had been Zebar, the 10th seat. Far beyond the known realms, a strange land had appeared. A colossal continent that had not existed before, materializing from nothing in the endless void of the cosmos. No one had seen it before. No one knew what it was. But it had become the talk of every race, every power, every god. It was the unknown land. And with its sudden emergence, the great ones themselves began to stir. Agaroth, being one of them, had sensed it immediately. The appearance of that world, and the Great One's unusual movements, meant something was coming, something enormous. Even the mortal races had begun plotting to invade it, to claim it as their own. And the Great Ones were no exception. That was why Crimson had chosen to return. "I fought you all," Crimson said, his body radiating with a fierce crimson glow, "because I needed to remember what it means to battle." He opened his eyes, twin suns of red fury. "Because from this moment on, I will begin hunting the Great Ones." His final words fell like thunder. The hall trembled. Even the strongest among them stared in disbelief. The first seat, Crimson, the blood of the king, had just declared war upon the Great Ones themselves. The demons, like the rest of existence, had decided to march toward the mysterious new continent that had appeared in the heart of the cosmos. And with that, the Nightmare Conference started. Marking a dreadful omen, a new catastrophe was about to begin. In Helmont, the return of the Nightmare Summit heralded calamities that threatened to reshape everything, opening doors to terrors long thought buried in ancient times. The resurgence of these disasters would remind the world once more of a dark and dreadful age from the distant past. The key revelations of the Nightmare Summit were as follows. 1. The unknown land. Somewhere in the cosmos, a mysterious land had appeared out of nothing. A vast, continent-sized structure floating silently in the void. Neither planet nor moon, but an ancient citadel, colossal in scale. No one knew what existed there. It was an absolute unknown. Yet strangely, the Great Ones showed a disturbing interest in it, their behavior growing erratic since its emergence. Even Agaroth, the Demon King, took notice. Races and major world powers began mobilizing expeditions to reach it, hoping to seize whatever lay within. And the demons, it seemed, would do the same. That was when the unexpected occurred. 2. The return of the first seat. For the first time since the war against Nameless, the first seat, Crimson, had returned to active duty, targeting the Great Ones themselves under the direct command of the Demon King. His power had grown monstrously since his last appearance, reaching the very pinnacle of existence. He now stood on par with Agaroth and Nameless, capable of annihilating all the other high seats by himself in a single terrifying display. Crimson's next mission was to lead an expedition to the unknown land, accompanied by Marva's, the fifth seat, and Agar's, the second seat, to wage war against the Great Ones. 3. The return of the Demon King. The Demon King Agaroth appeared publicly for the first time in ages. His mere presence was enough to suffocate any living creature who dared meet his gaze. Though calm and reserved, it was clear that the seal placed upon his soul by Nameless was weakening, and would not restrain him much longer. To address this, Weskier, the fourth seat, was given full responsibility over the matter, tasked to continue what he had begun on Earth, and to proceed with whatever plan he had already prepared for Fry Starlight. He would be accompanied, as expected, by Zebar and Geppetto. 4. Unification of the demon race. With Crimson's return, the age of divided authority was over. The demons would resume their invasion of other races, now united under one command rather than split between factions. Neither Marva's nor Weskier would retain autonomy. All were now bound to the will of the first seat, who in turn followed the direct orders of Agaroth himself. 5. The king's hidden interest. Agaroth spoke little, yet those attentive enough sensed his quiet fascination not only with the Great One's movements, but also with Earth and Fry Starlight in particular, a sign that the latter's fate was entangled with something far worse yet to come. These were the primary outcomes of the Nightmare Summit, attended personally by Agaroth himself. When it concluded, the high seats dispersed one by one, each shaken by what they had witnessed. Among them, Weskier departed in silence, his mind racing. The fourth seat was anything but pleased, given the figures that had appeared. Crimson, Agaroth. His influence now meant little. Weskier had always been cunning, always a step ahead of others, but before beings like the Demon King and the First Seat, such tactics were meaningless. They were entities beyond logic or manipulation. Their power alone placed them far above all else, especially Agaroth, whose mind was impossible to read. The king's eye could not perceive him. No being could. Agaroth was unlike any other demon. He had emerged from nothing in the ancient past, and ascended faster than any creature in history to become the mightiest of all. That mystery obsessed Weskier. When he used the king's eye on Crimson, he saw that Crimson had been born destined to become the Demon King. Yet Agaroth had broken that destiny, seizing the throne for himself instead. This meant one thing: Agaroth was an anomaly, an existence beyond fate itself. capable of altering destiny and bending it to his will. The creature known as the Devourer of All could absorb any number of abilities, many of them world-breaking, and had never once lost a battle. He had never fallen, never been forced to his knees. He truly is extraordinary. Weskier had long sought to uncover the riddle of his king, but despite all his efforts he failed. And with Agaroth dormant, unmoving, Weskier desired one thing: to free him, to break the chains that Nameless had placed upon his soul. For though Agaroth was exceptional, Nameless had been his equal. In matters of life, death, and spiritual manipulation, Nameless had even surpassed him, enough to bind his soul. The stronger Fry Starlight becomes, Weskier realized, the weaker the seal on the king grows. In other words, Fry Starlight must be pushed to his absolute limits, until he became the next Nameless. Only then would the seal shatter completely. Fry could not die, not yet. He needed to live, to be broken slowly, pushed past the edge until his mind and soul collapsed. Weskier was a master of such psychological warfare. He had prepared a grand, horrific design for Frey's undoing, a plan to destroy him from within. He would end up an empty shell, a puppet with no reason left to fight. That was the fourth seat's true aim. He had already played his first card, using Zebar against him. Though it had seemed as if the 10th seat had acted of his own will, Weskier had anticipated the move from the start, and merely hastened its outcome. That battle had pushed Fry Starlight further than ever, unlocking new doors of power. Now Weskier prepared for the next phase, the continuation of his silent duel with the blue-eyed engineer, who was also attempting to strengthen Fry. For now, both sought the same result. That was why they had not yet clashed directly. But Weskier wasn't naive. If Fry truly became the next Nameless, the result would be catastrophic. Even Crimson, in his current state, might not be enough to face him. Creating such a monster was no wise move. That was why Weskier's true strategy was to break Frey's will, to crush him slowly and surely, to forge a weapon with no purpose to swing itself. A hollow god. Having made his decision, Weskier prepared to return to Earth, to resume what he had started. Remaining away was far too dangerous. Who knew what the engineer, Gehrman, might do in his absence? As Weskier prepared to depart, he suddenly froze mid-step. His entire body stiffened, and his expression turned to stone, his knees nearly buckling beneath him. Eager to leave, are you? Tell me, Weskier, is the war on Earth truly that entertaining? The voice brushed past his ear, deep and calm, yet so immense that every particle of his being trembled. Weskier was tall, towering well over 2 meters, but the figure now standing behind him was slightly taller still. Slowly, with deliberate caution, Weskier turned. And then his 3 eyes met the crimson gaze of the being behind him. A shadowed form loomed there, its shape still cloaked in black mist, yet clear enough for one of Weskier's power to discern the faint outlines of its body. He tried to kneel immediately, but an invisible force held him upright. The one before him was none other than the Demon King himself. Agaroth, forgive my insolence, my king, Weskier managed to say through gritted teeth. I did not sense your presence at all. It was true. Even the 4th seat, gifted with the king's eye, could not perceive the Demon King unless Agaroth willed it. Just how immense was this being's power? No one knew. Among his countless abilities, one made all living things instinctively fear him. To each creature, Agaroth appeared as their worst nightmare incarnate. This effect was universal, affecting all beings except those who had reached SSS rank. Those rare few could perceive him only as a mass of black fog with burning red eyes, and only the most powerful among them could glimpse his true form. Weskier could see just enough. Agaroth's hair was impossibly long and black, cascading down like a waterfall that melted into shadows trailing behind him. His skin was pale as bone, his features sharp, almost sculpted by malice. His body was cloaked in a garment woven from pure dark aura, and his eyes, Those eyes glowed entirely red. One of them was the same eye that shone on Weskir's own forehead. The king's eye. The other, it was said, was another world-breaking power, though no one knew what it truly did. This was Agaroth, the devourer of all, the true king of demons. And he had come to meet Weskir in person, moments after the Nightmare Summit ended. "Weskir," Agaroth said, stepping closer, his tone low but commanding. "You have always been among the sharpest of demons. That is why I gave you the king's eye. Because I knew you would wield it well." Weskir trembled as the words struck him like thunder. "Your praise exceeds anything I deserve, my king," he muttered, unable to meet the king's eyes. Agaroth let out a quiet laugh, a sound far too gentle for a being of his stature. "Spare me the false humility, Weskir. Tell me, after carrying my eye for thousands of years, what have you seen? What have you learned?" Weskir hesitated before answering, his voice shaky but steady. "I've learned that fate and destiny are merely two sides of the same hand, easily flipped and rewritten by those who know how." Agaroth smiled faintly, satisfied. "Well said." He nodded, approving. Weskir was right. For countless ages, beings had despaired under the weight of destiny, believing it immutable. But to entities like Agaroth, fate was just another thread to sever and reweave. "Now then, Weskir," Agaroth continued softly, drawing nearer, "do you know why I've come to you?" The fourth seat's heart pounded. Every passing second felt heavier. "There is no way I could predict your will, my king, but perhaps it concerns the human war? Or Fry Starlight?" He truly believed that was the answer. Agaroth had long shown interest in the boy, but wrong answer. The words were spoken casually, almost playfully. Yet the instant they left Agaroth's lips, something inside Weskir shattered. An invisible force crushed through him, no visible attack, no movement. As though the world itself had punished him simply for being wrong. And Agaroth hadn't even done it intentionally. Reality itself seemed to enforce his will. That was the level of madness and dominance he commanded. Unfazed by Weskir's silent agony, the king continued. "You see, world-breaking abilities aren't truly absolute as you all believe. They are merely extensions of the laws that maintain this world's structure." Agaroth raised a hand, placing it before Weskir's trembling face. "Look at me, Weskir." Weskir hesitated, but the king's power forced him to obey. Agaroth's crimson eye began to glow, brighter than ever. "The world's laws mean nothing to me. That is why I can nullify the absolutes of any world-breaking ability. In other words, I can nullify the absoluteness of your king's eye." Weskir's breath hitched. His greatest gift, made useless before its source. But Agaroth wasn't finished. "Likewise," he continued, "I can nullify the absolutes of my own powers. I've already disabled my own king's eye, because I am curious." The fourth seat's knees trembled violently. "I've always wanted to know," Agaroth said quietly, "what my own fate looks like to others." At that moment, Weskir's composure broke. A raspy scream tore from his throat as his body convulsed. By suppressing his own eye, Agaroth had made it possible for Weskir to see the Demon King's destiny. Something no creature in existence was ever meant to witness. "Tell me, Weskir, what do you see when you look at me?" The king's voice was calm, amused, almost eager. The only answer he received was Weskir's maddened scream. His mind collapsed under the vision before him. He clawed at his own face, trying to tear out the eye on his forehead, desperate to end it. But Agaroth stopped him. In that final, hopeless instant, Weskir's gaze fell upon the soul of the Demon King. And what he saw there was a horror no living being could withstand. The horrors of the devourer of all. With a deep frown, the Demon King stared at the writhing form of Weskir before him. The faint trace of amusement on his lips soon vanished. At first, Weskir had only screamed. But then silence fell. His body began to convulse violently, trembling in ways that defied anatomy. Blood erupted from the third eye on his forehead, streaming down his face. The fourth seat had reached the edge of his sanity. Even you, the strongest among them in mental fortitude. Still, you break so easily. Weskier had fallen into this state after Agaroth nullified all his world, breaking absolutes, stripping himself bare of protection. That act had allowed Weskier's king's eye to glimpse the Demon King's destiny, a sight never meant for mortal or immortal minds alike. Agaroth had been curious about his own fate. That was why he'd given Weskier the king's eye in the first place. But it seemed destiny had decided that his own future would forever remain unseen. When the fourth seat's mind began to collapse, Agaroth ended the process. He reactivated his internal barriers, cutting off Weskier's sight into the impossible. The moment he did, Weskier dropped limply to his knees, broken but alive. Agaroth glanced at him once more, then turned away, disinterested. A ripple of black aura smoke burst from behind him as he walked off, leaving Weskier sprawled in a pool of black blood, seeping endlessly from his ruined eye. As the Demon King wandered through the towering corridors of his vast citadel, the monument built solely for him, he found himself lost in thought. Casually, he raised his hand, then clenched it into a fist. The very air around him shattered. An immense surge of aura split the void, twisting the air into rippling waves of distortion. All that from a single motion of his hand. It was said that a single punch from Agaroth charged with aura was equivalent to a strike delivered by a world-breaking ability itself. Only Nameless, with his black hole aura, had ever surpassed Agaroth's natural control over aura. Yet the king's danger went far beyond that, for he could wield multiple world-breaking powers and even fuse them together. Strange, he murmured. With all this power, I still cannot perceive my own fate. Agaroth, the Demon King, the devourer of all. So many names, yet all carried the same meaning. His eyes could see everything. Every life, every future, every possibility. There was no existence that could escape his sight. He could gaze into the destiny of all beings with a single glance. And yet, ironically, he could not see his own. The soul of the Demon King was something alien, veiled in absolute darkness. No one had ever been able to peer through it. Those who tried lost their minds, just as Weskier had. Even Agaroth himself had tried once, and failed. When he looked within, he saw nothing but endless, impenetrable shadow. Even he, the mightiest of all, had lost to himself in that moment. He was the only one, Agaroth whispered, the only one who ever saw through that darkness. His gaze unfocused as ancient memories resurfaced, echoes from a time long before he became what he was. Somewhere in a forgotten era of the vast world, there stood a large house, its structure resembling that of humankind's old pre-industrial age, like something taken straight from a Victorian era long lost to time. Within that house lived many strange beings, creatures who had chosen to take human form. There were girls and boys, running up and down its halls, laughing and chasing after a man who visited them often. That man was a memory, a heavy one that refused to fade. As those echoes of laughter and footsteps rang faintly in his mind, Agaroth arrived at the 131st floor of his tower, a place known only to himself and Crimson. He opened the door and stepped into a room unlike any other in the dark citadel. Unlike the rest of the oppressive fortress, this chamber was beautifully crafted, its floor carpeted in crimson rugs, its walls adorned with ornate golden patterns, furnished in the same Victorian style of the memories haunting his thoughts. And there, in the center, behind curtains of white silk, sat a woman on a throne-like chair. Her eyes were closed, dark shadows blooming beneath them. Her crimson hair hung loose and wild, and from within her body extended thousands of glowing red threads, snaking across the floor, pulsing faintly with light, each one feeding into the ground, draining something from her. Around her fluttered red butterflies, silent, ghostly, fading in and out of existence. Agaroth stared at her quietly, and in his mind he could almost hear the echo of that old voice. The voice of the man who once called out to the children of that house. Leah, Seth, Fry, Audrey, Arlecchino, and you, Agaroth. The woman before him was none other than the legendary vessel. Audrey, the girl he had kept close to him for ages. Audrey possessed a world-breaking ability known as the Infinite Core, a power that granted her an endless reservoir of aura. Her energy was limitless, an infinite source of life force, unmatched by any being in existence. Because of that, Agaroth had turned her into a living reactor, feeding endless vitality into the demonic race, replacing the life they could no longer steal after they ceased their invasions of other worlds. And so she had remained there, bound, drained, and tormented in silence for countless years. No one visited her, except Agaroth himself. He approached her now, his monstrous presence looming over her still form. Her eyelids remained tightly shut, but she was awake, conscious of everything. The pain she endured was too sharp to allow her the mercy of unconsciousness. It wasn't her aura being drained anymore. It was her soul. Decades. Centuries had broken her beyond repair. She could no longer move. She could only sit there, trembling, while his tainted hand brushed against her tangled hair. "You're in pain, aren't you?" The Demon King's smile deepened. "I'm sorry. It's been so long since I've felt pain myself. I doubt I can truly understand yours." He wiped the blood from her face with a slow, almost gentle touch, then stepped back, his expression turning faintly distant. "I don't even know why I came here," he murmured. "The memories must have led me here, without my realizing it." And as his words echoed softly in the chamber, Agaroth, the devourer of all, stood before the woman whose existence connected him to a past even he could no longer fully remember. "Do you hate me, I wonder? Because I'm the one who killed him? Because I'm the one who ended his life?" Agaroth's voice was quiet, almost curious. Then he let out a soft laugh. "But he never truly died. He's right here." The Demon King tapped his chest, right where an endless vortex of void churned deep within him. "To be honest, I once intended to consume you too, to join you with the rest of them. But you're far more useful like this, just as you are now." He paused, his crimson gaze dimming slightly. "I thought something inside me would move when I hurt you like this. When I saw you broken, ruined, a shadow of what you once were. But the hollow inside me is deeper, wider than I imagined. I feel nothing." Agaroth sat down in front of her. Nothing at all. Somewhere along his ascent to power, to becoming the mightiest being in existence, Agaroth had gained much, and lost even more. That was the curse that accompanied absolute power, an emptiness so vast only he could comprehend it. He, the devourer of all, forever consuming yet never fulfilled. For a while, he remained in Audrey's chamber, silently watching her. The Infinite Core. Before finally leaving, disinterested once again, he ascended back to the very top of his tower, the 132nd floor, the crimson sky of Helmont. The uppermost level was open to the burning red heavens, the skyline of Helmont itself serving as its roof. There, standing at the edge, Agaroth gazed downward. From his perch, he could see the entire world that lay beneath him. The realm that was supposed to be his dominion, his creation. Yet he felt nothing for it. No pride, no belonging, only a void. Then, as his solitude stretched on, a familiar presence approached from behind. The only one permitted to set foot on the summit and stand before the Demon King face to face. Crimson, the Red Moon, the first seat of the High Demons. My king! Clad in his blood armor, the first seat stood a short distance behind. His crimson eyes filled with conflicting emotions. Foremost among them, absolute loyalty. Agaroth chuckled softly. "You always choose the strangest times to appear before me." He stepped away from the edge, his footsteps heavy against the stone floor, until he stood beside Crimson. Then he extended his hand and rested it upon the first seat's chest plate. "Do these feelings weigh on you, I wonder?" Crimson said nothing. He couldn't. The first seat was unique, not merely for his strength, but because he alone among the demons had been allowed to share multiple world-breaking powers with the Demon King. Yet of all the gifts Agaroth could bestow, Crimson had received the strangest of them all. Emotion. The emotions of the Demon King. His echoes of pain and emptiness. Through them, Crimson could understand exactly what his king felt. The crushing loneliness, the unending silence, the isolation that came with absolute might, the solitude of a being unmatched, who could no longer feel, having ascended to a level no creature could ever reach. In such moments, Crimson had only one answer. He raised his weapon, the Kingslayer's spear, and unleashed his full, devastating aura, ready for battle. And so, atop the tower beneath the red sky of Helmont, Crimson, the first seat, challenged his master Agaroth, the Demon King. Their clash defied comprehension. A thunderous, world-shaking battle that split the heavens and tore the earth below. Crimson fought with desperate fury, yearning to stir something, anything within his king, to make him feel again, to remind him of the thrill of battle, of what it meant to fight for victory, to fight for life. He had trained endlessly for that purpose, pushing his limits beyond comprehension, reaching a level that rivaled the great ones themselves. All for him. He had even created the Red Domain, the most powerful defensive technique in existence. A barrier strong enough to withstand even the Demon King's might. Yet in the end, beneath the crimson sky, Crimson lay fallen. His spear slipping from his hand, his back pressed against the cold ground. Beside him, Agaroth sat quietly, dark aura unfurling around him like a black mantle spreading across the earth like roots. Once again, the outcome was the same as always. Crimson had lost. As he always did. Every time he came to fight the king, hoping to awaken him. Perhaps that was Crimson's greatest regret. That he could never grant his king what he desired most. The feeling of being alive again. A being so powerful that nothing in existence could challenge him. And yet, bound to a warrior who worshipped him so completely, that his entire existence was devoted to serving one man. Agaroth sat silently beside his fallen first seat, his mind wandering into the depths of memory once more. When was it, I wonder, the last time I truly felt my life in danger? The first thing that surfaced was the battle against Nameless. The heat, the struggle, the ecstasy of combat. That had been the pinnacle, without question. But it wasn't the only memory. Ha! I'm losing myself. Living in the past more than the present. When was the last time he had truly stood on the brink of death? Against Nameless? Against my brothers? Or perhaps, when we all united against that filthy one? Each answer was correct in its own way. But could such a battle ever happen again? For someone like him now? He looked toward the horizon, his crimson eyes burning brighter. Go, Crimson, pave the way. The Demon King's voice reverberated through the sky. A moment later, his eyes blazed with terrifying light, and even Crimson, who had faced death itself countless times, flinched at the sight. Prepare the path, until I break free from this prison. And when I finally leave Helmont, Agaroth's aura surged like a storm. Let the world know that the end has come. The great ones, the Pantheon, the bearers of light, no matter the race or realm. They had all forgotten what it meant to stand against Agaroth. And the Demon King intended to remind them. In a way no living creature would ever forget. Far away from the chaos unfolding above. The kind that could strike the universe at any moment. The planet Earth, home of humankind, rested quietly at one corner of the vast cosmos. At least for now, it was relatively safe from the devastating consequences of the first High One's return. Still, peace was an illusion. The situation across the stars was far from stable. The war had reached its final stage, and everyone knew that the next battle would decide everything. The Ultras had gathered every remaining force, retreating from all advanced fronts and abandoning territories they had once bled to defend. That withdrawal allowed the Empire to advance deeper into their lands than ever before. Until they stood only a few dozen miles away from Caelid, the capital of the Ultras and the heart of their civilization. The fall of Caelid would mark the official end of the Ultras. Even if some of their resistance survived elsewhere, the fall of their capital would signify the beginning of the end. The Ultras had suffered catastrophic losses. Never before had Imperial forces penetrated their continent so deeply. By now, the Empire controlled nearly half the continent, a vast territory by any measure. Under normal circumstances, such expansion would have brought immense gain, but the lands of the Ultras were barren, drained of all life. A dead realm where nothing grew. Owning it was almost meaningless. The Empire gained nothing from its conquest. The only cities of true value were the 4 cities of high blood, which still maintained a civilization advanced enough to rival the Empire's own. Of these 4, the Empire had managed to capture only Sheskler. The remaining 3 remained untouched, but that was about to change. For the Imperial army now stood at the center of the continent, before Caelid itself. The Ultras had gathered every warrior they could muster there, preparing for a final battle that would eclipse all previous wars. They would fight for their capital, for their home, and they would defend it no matter the cost. The Imperial army, on the other hand, would attack with the same resolve, to bring Caelid down no matter the price. Everyone knew what was coming. The next battle would be the bloodiest yet. There was no question of that. One of the key reasons the Ultras would fight so fiercely was the fact that Caelid was full of civilians. Their families, their loved ones. Many of them were too weak to fight, even after being injected with demonic blood. Some humans survived the transformation process, but their strength didn't always grow. On paper, the Ultras appeared to have the advantage. They had mobilized nearly 100,000 soldiers. Their entire remaining force. The Empire, by contrast, had fewer. After years of war, battles with the Church, and the withdrawal of divisions to defend their own territories, their numbers had dwindled to around 40,000 on the main front. From the start, the Ultras had always outnumbered them. Their harsh lives had turned nearly every one of them into a fighter. The Empire's people, on the other hand, had lived in comfort, protected from the brutality of constant war. In short, 100,000 against 40,000. A numerical advantage of more than double for the Ultras. But numbers meant nothing here. Everyone knew the Empire still held the upper hand. Because of who fought for them. Monsters whose names alone inspired dread. Fry Starlight, Snow Lionheart. Weeks earlier, the Ultras had tried to kill them, setting a trap that should have ended both of their lives. But the two had escaped with ease. Now, after all this time, both had recovered completely, ready to unleash their full power. And even without Fry and Snow, the Empire still held terrifying forces. Emperor Mikar Valerian and Sir Alone Valerian, both moving under the command of Prince Aegon Valerian's grand strategy. The Ultras knew these monsters would soon descend upon them, whether they could withstand the assault. That would determine the fate of the entire war. Within the Imperial encampments clustered near Caelid, the armies had finally united. There, Fry met with his comrades once more. He and Snow had returned together, joining Demon and the others. Their allies had been furious at Frey's disappearance, leaving them behind to face the horrors of the war alone. But seeing him return unharmed, and with Snow beside him, their anger soon faded. Afterward, the group had fought their way back, cutting through waves of Ultras along the retreat. But none of that posed a real threat to them. Their strength was beyond ordinary measure. At last, the entire Imperial force reunited. Other divisions arrived soon after. Among them the unit led by Oliver Kahn, accompanied by Ghost Umbra and Sansa Valerian. Fry hadn't seen them since before the battle with the Church. So much had changed since then. He had fought S-Class and SSS-Class beings more than once. His duel against Zebar being the most brutal of them all. Now, when the soldiers lifted their eyes to the sky, they could still see it. The fractured moon, split cleanly in two, its pale light still shining upon the world, forever scarred. Everyone knew the truth. That wound in the heavens was carved by Fry Starlight's blade, and no one else's. During his fight with Zebar, he had unleashed a shockwave so powerful that every living being on the planet had felt it. That cursed aura was terrifying, yet unmistakably familiar to those who had traveled with him long enough. There was no doubt. Fry had done it. That single act had placed him on a level beyond understanding. A level few could even begin to comprehend. And yet, Ghost and Sansa greeted him as if nothing had changed. Ghost remained his usual cold, detached self. He had fought too long in Frey's shadow to feel awe anymore. His silent presence naturally gravitated back to Frey's side. Sansa, at first, tried to maintain her usual calm, the direct, confident demeanor she had always shown. But it quickly crumbled. What emerged instead was something closer to who she had been before her transformation into a demon. And in that moment, Fry realized. She had been thinking of him all this time, ever since he'd pushed her away and left without her. Seeing Uriel Platini unconsciously lingering close to him didn't help matters at all. Whenever Fry checked his affection system, the result was always the same. Sansa Valyrian. Current affection points, 100. Her points had never dropped. They had always remained the highest of all. That meant she truly loved him. Something she herself had only come to understand once she'd been away from him. Their old relationship had never been built on the right foundation. It was born out of mutual need, not choice. After Sansa's transformation into a demon, every human had rejected her. Every single one except Fry. He alone had accepted her, unafraid of what she had become. Naturally, that made her cling to him all the more. She'd already been close to him before, but now he became her anchor. To Fry, meanwhile, Sansa had been his refuge. A place of quiet after the endless suffering, after the massacres that left thousands dead by his hands. No matter how much he changed, no matter how monstrous he became, Fry was still human in the end. A man who could crumble under the weight of everything pressing down on him. Sansa was the one who eased that burden, the one who allowed him to breathe again. At least during the brief moments they shared alone. That had been the nature of their bond. But it began to fracture the moment Oliver Kahn accepted Sansa too. Ready to throw away his life for her if needed. That was when the balance shattered. Fry was no longer the only one who could accept her. Because now, Oliver was there. In that moment, Fry became cold. He pushed her away. If Oliver Kahn is with you, then you don't need me anymore. He had known all too well the kind of life he lived. The kind of battles that awaited him. So when he saw a chance to push Sansa away from that danger, he took it. Without hesitation. But that cruelty had left a deep scar on the demon girl's heart. For a long time afterward, she found herself questioning. What kind of bond truly connected her to the man called Fry Starlight? Even while fighting alongside Oliver, through countless battles against monsters like Gavid Linman, and even V, whom she once faced herself. Fry never left her thoughts. That was when she realized something important. Something she had never told him. She had never confessed. She had never once gone to him and said, "I love you." From the very start, their relationship had begun wrongly. Built upon mutual dependence, not true emotion. So this time, upon seeing him again, she wanted to tell him properly. She wanted to make it right. The opportunity finally came. After the army's reunion, Fry and Sansa found themselves alone at night, away from the others. They stood facing one another, alone under the dark, barren sky beside the human encampment. Sansa opened her mouth to speak, but in that crucial moment, She found herself unable to form a single word. Despite rehearsing the words hundreds, even thousands of times in her mind, nothing came out. Whenever she was nervous, she had a habit of touching her demonic horns. Now, unconsciously, she stepped back a few paces, her fingers brushing them as she stared at him, at those dead, unfeeling eyes of Fry Starlight, at the ominous aura that surrounded him. He was changing, becoming something else entirely, and she felt fear, not of him, but of the growing distance between them, a gap widening with every passing day. Conflicting emotions swirled within her. There was so much she wanted to say, that she ended up saying nothing at all. Her body trembled softly as she realized. She had left him standing there waiting in silence. Fry, I. Her voice faltered. She tried again, but the words refused to come. That was when Fry moved. He sighed and smiled faintly. I don't deserve all this, not even a fraction of it. He said it to himself, but it only made Sansa's heart tighten. Ignoring her confusion, Fry stepped closer, slowly. For some reason, you no longer look like the demon I once knew, he murmured. You look like the human Sansa again, the uncertain one. It's nostalgic. And then he reached her, pulling her into a tight embrace. Why? Because Sansa didn't need to say anything. He already knew. Through the affection system, he could see her thoughts clearly. And they were chaotic. So chaotic she couldn't hide them from him at all. Fry understood everything. Every detail of what she felt. He knew how deeply she loved him. And that knowledge stirred something inside him. Something he hadn't felt in a long time. He had always ignored emotions like these, believing they had no place in the life he lived. But doing so had only hurt Sansa more. Now, trembling in his arms, she finally broke down, tears spilling uncontrollably. Between sobs, she returned his embrace, and whispered against his ear, voice trembling, Fry, I love you. I really, really love you. Her words lingered in the air beside him. Fry held her tighter, his eyes softening at last. I know, he said quietly. At the borders of the Ultra's capital, Khalid, the Imperial forces had gathered, and the battle was now closer than ever before. But on one of those long nights of preparation, amid the tightening siege surrounding the Ultras, something entirely different took place. That night witnessed Sansa Valerian's direct confession to Fry Starlight. For the first time ever, she told him clearly, I love you. For some reason, those simple words carried a weight Fry never expected. A weight that struck deeper than he could have imagined. Away from the rest of the army, holding her in his arms, she still looked the same. Her white hair, her black dress, but her face now resembled the human Sansa, the blonde-haired version she once was. Fry had known for a long time about the feelings she harbored for him. The affection system was proof enough. Sansa was the only one who had ever reached 100 points. But words, spoken aloud, carried a truth far beyond any number. And in that moment, Fry finally realized how unfair he had been to her, how he had pushed her away when she needed him most. It must have hurt her deeply. She must have endured so much, just to find the courage to express her feelings the right way. And what had he done in return? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. Worse, he'd grown closer to Uriel Platini, a girl who carried similar feelings toward him. Enough that he had kissed her, unconsciously. Even now, Fry Starlight had never truly felt anything that could be called love for anyone. And he was fully convinced of that. His life, his suffering, had never allowed room for something like romance. The pressure he carried was far too heavy. Fighting to change his destiny, challenging the giants who ruled the world's summit. These were the things that mattered more than anything else. But that never gave him the right to ignore what the girl before him had carried for so long, or what she was willing to sacrifice for him. As Sansa cried softly in his arms, something stirred within Frey's heart. For a fleeting moment, the cold ice around it melted, and his heartbeat quickened ever so slightly. Those dull, fading emotions of his flickered back to life, and he realized that what he felt for her might run deeper than he had ever admitted to himself. "I'm sorry for keeping you away," Fry whispered, wiping the tears from her cheeks. "To be honest, I still can't say it the way you just did. A half-hearted confession would be meaningless. You deserve more than that, much more." He smiled faintly, then gently pushed her back against a nearby stone wall, until her body met the cold surface completely. He wanted to tell her he loved her too, but deep down he knew the timing wasn't right. His emotions were still too faint, too clouded. Even so, he was certain. What he felt for Sansa surpassed anything he'd felt for anyone else. What was wrong with their old relationship? What was wrong with the new one? They had needed each other for so long. They had lived for each other in their own way. What was wrong with that? Wasn't that also a form of love? "Yes, it is," Fry muttered with a faint, ironic laugh. Sansa blinked in confusion. "Fry, what are you?" "There's no need for words," he said quietly. "I don't think anything I say could express it properly. But instead, I can do this." Before she could react, Fry stepped forward suddenly. His body pressed harder against hers, and his lips crashed into hers in a deep, consuming kiss she never saw coming. No, she had expected it, in some distant corner of her heart. But not like this, not with such raw force. In that moment, Fry wasn't thinking. He wasn't being rational. He was simply acting on feeling, on the desire burning inside him. A desire directed only toward her. He kissed her for a long time. So long that, when he finally pulled away, Sansa gasped for air. Her face flushed crimson, her thoughts scattered and chaotic. Before she could even recover, Fry kissed her again, this time even deeper, and it was no ordinary kiss. For a while, they forgot everything else. The war, the battles, the struggle for survival. For that brief, fragile span of time, they lived in a world of their own. When Fry finally pulled back once more, Sansa's face was burning red. Even with all her demonic strength, her knees trembled, barely keeping her upright. Seeing her like that only made Frey's desire grow stronger. "I could devour you whole right now," he murmured. And in that instant, Sansa knew the night would be long. As the two of them gave in to their emotions, another night passed across the lands of the Ultras, a night burning with heat. Far from Fry and Sansa, back in the heart of the Imperial camp, the main command tent lay quiet and empty. Inside, there were only two people, Sir Alone Valyrian and his son Mikar. The latter sat silently, his posture slouched. He looked different, tired, unsteady, unlike himself. Sir Alone Valyrian kept his eyes on his son the entire time. His face was a mixture of anger and deep disappointment. "To think my eldest, my strongest would end up like this," he sighed, the weight of his words carrying both regret and exhaustion. He had watched the growing madness in his son for years now. Back when Mikar returned to the Empire during the Church's invasion, Sir Alone had personally gone after him. And what he found had been horrifying. When Mikar discovered that the body of the man he had long been obsessed with was nowhere to be found, he lost control completely. In a blind frenzy, he attacked everyone around him, killing dozens with his own hands, believing they had hidden the truth from him. If Sir Alone hadn't intervened that day, Mikar would have unleashed a catastrophe upon the Empire itself. Now, seeing what his family had become, the Iron Emperor could feel nothing but anger. Perhaps the only glimmer of hope left in the Valyrian name rested on his grandson, Aegon Valyrian, the young prince currently leading their entire war camp. Aegon was brilliant, sharp beyond his years. A born commander, both tactically gifted and ruthlessly pragmatic. When he revealed his full power, it was formidable enough. But what truly set him apart was his mind. He was a better leader than any of them had ever been. To Sir Alone, Aegon was the beacon of light, the future emperor who would restore the Valyrian legacy and cleanse the stain his father and predecessors had left behind. Aegon was everything the family needed to survive. Calculated, logical, and completely free from emotional weakness. He did what needed to be done, no matter the cost. To some, he might have seemed cold, even dark. But to Sir alone, he was exactly what this era required. He was obsessed with one thing only, keeping the Valyrian name on top. Above the empire, above humanity, above everyone. That was why, when he learned that Fry Starlight had tried to kill his grandson, Sir alone would not let it go. Yes, Fry was humanity's strongest ally, a weapon unmatched, a savior in this brutal war. But he was also a danger. One that could one day turn on them all. At the start of the war, Frey's strength had been comparable to an SS Plus rank at best. But now, near its end, his power had grown into something unquantifiable. He had split the moon with his blade. That alone was enough to prove that Fry now stood among the SSS-class beings, a realm few could ever hope to reach. He was more than just an ally. He was a force of nature, and a force that no one could control. A hero to some, perhaps, but to Sir alone, he was a loaded weapon aimed straight at his bloodline. Because once the war was over, Fry would come for Aegon again. And when that happened, Sir alone doubted they could stop him. At the hands of that monster named Fry Starlight, the entire Valyrian line could be wiped out. And to alone, that would be no different from losing the war itself. An uncontrollable weapon is always the most dangerous one. As the Iron Emperor brooded over possible ways to deal with Fry, a third figure entered the command tent. A familiar face. It was Aegon Valyrian himself. Aegon. Sir alone frowned, while Mikar remained silent. Grandfather. Aegon greeted him with his usual composed tone, but alone immediately questioned him. Where have you been? I've searched for you everywhere. Aegon smiled faintly. I needed time to clear my thoughts, and to prepare our final battle plan. The next assault will end the Ultras once and for all. Hearing that, Sir alone only nodded. Good. But try not to vanish on your own again. You're the supreme commander now. Your presence is vital. I understand, Aegon replied curtly, narrowing his eyes slightly. You seem troubled, grandfather. Ha! How could I not be? The old man muttered. Aegon tilted his head, a knowing glint in his eyes. Is it because of Fry Starlight? Sir Alone's expression said it all. Aegon smirked. There's no need to worry about him. Focus on the Ultras. As for Fry Starlight, he smiled. A calm, confident smile that chilled the air. Leave him to me. I'll handle him personally. Sir Alone stared at his grandson in disbelief. Fry Starlight, the monster who could single-handedly stand against the entire empire. But Aegon Valyrian was not one to make empty claims. At least for now, the Iron Emperor chose to believe him. And so the two men sat together, discussing the final strategy. The plan that would bring the war to its ultimate end. 3 full months had passed since the beginning of the War of Darkness. 3 months that felt like years to some. And now the final battle had finally come. Surrounding the Ultras' capital, Caelid, the Imperial army was fully assembled and ready to move. Imperial soldiers, 40,000. Ultras warriors, 1,000,000. Both sides had prepared for the inevitable collision. And yet, despite the vast difference in numbers, the balance tilted unmistakably in favor of the Empire. Within the Imperial ranks stood Snow Lionheart and Fry Starlight, 2 forces who refused to obey Aegon Valyrian's direct commands, choosing instead to act on their own judgment. Aegon's plan this time was simple and direct. He established a strategic siege around Caelid, smartly dividing his forces and placing powerful elites across each front. In doing so, he used Fry and Snow indirectly. Even though they had rejected his authority, their positions on the battlefield perfectly complemented his strategy. Over the past months, Aegon had led the empire to countless victories across the continent. From the very beginning of the war, he had commanded their armies with calculated brilliance. And alongside the sheer destruction wrought by Frey, could be said that Aegon's control over the flow of war had been the key factor behind the empire's conquest of half the continent in just 3 months. If not for the church's interference, he might have reached Caelid even sooner. Throughout the campaign, Aegon relied on precise strategies and adaptive maneuvers. But this time he chose a different path, a direct assault, without hesitation or delay. His tactic was simple: strike fast, strike hard, and leave the enemy no time to think. A lightning war, a single, decisive clash of annihilation. And that was exactly what happened. The two armies collided just outside Caelid Crimson walls. The Ultras, who had hoped to stall for time, were now forced to fight head-on. It didn't take long before the great names joined the chaos. Lord Gavid Linman was there, Murgo as well, and the masked enigma known as V, each commanding their own forces with terrifying strength. But despite their power, they were being pushed back. Sir Alone Valyrian and his son Mikar fought side by side. One wielding light, the other lightning. Together, they were a natural disaster incarnate, tearing through the Ultras' ranks. Even Gavid Linman, despite his ghostly form, struggled against Alone's blindingly fast attacks. V, on the other hand, performed better than his master. But even he wasn't fighting at full capacity. He still retained Frey Starlight's copied form, reserved for the moment when he would finally face the real one. Thus, his true strength remained restrained. Looking across the Ultras' army, several notable figures were missing. The hollow Simon Manus had not appeared. Only his endless puppet legions marched in his stead. As for the puppeteer himself, he was nowhere to be found. The demonic witch Beatrice had yet to show herself, and her loyal warrior, the demon general Beleth, was also absent. However, the movement of blood across the battlefield, attacking both friend and foe alike, proved that the hollow Evelyn was indeed present, and Ludwig too had been spotted in the chaos. But beyond that, despite this being the so-called final battle, the Ultras appeared strangely incomplete, their strongest champions nowhere to be seen. For that reason, Frey Starlight and Snow Lionheart had chosen to hold their positions at the rear of the Imperial army, accompanied by many of their comrades. The battle was fierce beyond measure. The sound of clashing blades and shattering metal echoed for miles into the night. Every passing second claimed more lives. To the outside eye, it truly seemed like the final war. "Looks like our side holds the advantage," Snow muttered, idly spinning Vermithor between his fingers. Frey, standing beside him, clasped his hands together, unimpressed by the sight before him. "Murgo bet everything on this battle," Frey said coldly. "He claimed we wouldn't win, but what I see now says otherwise." Snow raised a brow, but Frey's gaze remained fixed on the horizon. Wars were deceptive. They could shift in an instant, and deep down, Frey was certain. The real battle hadn't even begun yet. At any moment, a new variable could emerge from the shadows and change everything. He scanned the field once more with sharp precision. All his allies were nearby. Snow Lionheart, his strongest comrade, his brother in arms. Ghost Umbra, who had returned to his shadowy form. Sansa, Uriel, Cerys, Dawn, and the others, all were within range. Among them, Cerys looked particularly grim. Her uncle Baelor had yet to appear, and that only deepened Frey's unease. Then, narrowing his hawk eyes, Frey spotted Aegon Valyrian far in the distance, stationed safely away, watching the war unfold. Even across that vast expanse, Aegon turned his gaze to meet Frey's, smiling faintly and waving a hand in mock greeting. Frey didn't react. He'd seen enough of the prince's tricks to know. Nothing about Aegon surprised him anymore. At that moment, Frey unleashed his full SSS tier aura, spreading it across the entire battlefield. and even over the city of Kaled itself, to detect any lurking threat. "Stay alert," Fry said calmly. "We move the moment anything happens." Snow nodded. "I already know. The true enemies weren't the humans, but the demons." The 13th ranked demon, Geppetto, was still at large, and Snow feared his puppet body more than anything else. He had told Fry about it, but even then, Fry couldn't fully comprehend the power Snow had described. Geppetto possessed multiple bodies, each one strong enough to rival the SSS tier. That alone made him one of the most dangerous demons alive. But the creature Snow had faced before, that body, was different. It wasn't just stronger than Geppetto himself. It was so overwhelmingly powerful that Snow was convinced it could erase the 13th ranked demon with only a few swings of that blinding sort of light. Even the anointed war state wasn't enough to withstand those blindingly fast, crushing slashes of light. Fry had dealt with a copy of Zebar, and it was unlikely that the real one would appear anytime soon, which meant that this body was currently the most dangerous threat on the field. A body that would require both Fry and Snow working together to bring it down. And so they waited, and waited, but nothing happened. Neither Geppetto nor his puppet body showed themselves. The Empire, however, began to dominate the battle. After several hours of fighting, victory was clearly tipping in their favor. "If things continue like this," Ghost muttered as he stepped out from the shadows, "our side will win within a few hours." "I know," Fry replied. His gaze locked on the front lines, but despite what he saw, none of it made sense. "Maybe this isn't the final battle everyone thinks it is," Fry said quietly. "Too many of the Ultra's forces are missing." Ghost shook his head. "I doubt that. Once their capital and main army fall, it's over for them. Even if a few powerful names remained, they could be hunted down later. The fall of Kaled would mark the end of the Ultras. And Ghost Umbra was certain of it. He had been unusually quiet lately, remaining deep in the shadows, as if he, too, were waiting for something. Just like Fry, just like Snow. Both of them had grown terrifyingly strong. So bright that even their allies could hardly look at them. And while the light soared higher and higher, the shadow struggled to expand and keep up. On the surface, Ghost seemed calm, but deep inside, he was more anxious than Fry Starlight himself. During those long, heavy hours of war, his mind wandered back to the moment years ago, when he had reached the 10th Court of Shadows, a place no one before him had ever reached. The Courts of Shadow were strange realms, filled with trials and ordeals that shattered the human spirit. And surely they were not built by men. Ghost had been the only one to ever step into the 10th. But unlike what he and others had imagined, it wasn't a trial. It wasn't even grand. Deep underground, in a silent, dreadful place, the 10th Court was nothing more than a single dark room. A room with one chair. And on that chair sat a man who made Ghost's heart freeze in terror. The moment he laid eyes on him, that man was wrong. He was nothing like a human. He wore a torn black suit, and atop his gray hair rested a long, crooked black hat. But what stood out most were his arms, each one more than 2 meters long. That was why Ghost called him the man with the long arms. A being beyond reason, terrifying to behold. And yet, his personality completely contradicted his appearance. He was playful, unpredictable. He toyed with Ghost more than once during his stay in that room. At first, Ghost thought it was all part of some twisted test. But nothing ever happened. All the man did was talk. He talked endlessly. About things Ghost couldn't understand at the time. And yet, through that conversation, Ghost learned much. Every one of his space-bending techniques had originated from that encounter. The man's stories were mostly incoherent. Myths of non-human civilizations, events from worlds beyond their own. But lately, some of those tales had started to sound eerily familiar, as if they were describing events unfolding now on Earth. The man with the long arms had spoken of war, of a conflict so great it would reshape history itself. He spoke of a warrior, a single man who would stand at its center. A man forged through endless suffering, who would rise above all others. That man, the long-armed one had said, will be the light, and you, Ghost, must rise to become his shadow. Now Ghost had no doubt. That man was Fry Starlight, and the battle he spoke of, the one destined to alter the flow of history, was this very war. There was no question anymore. The man with the long arms knew the future. He had taught Ghost things far beyond his current reach. Powers he was still unfit to wield. Everything that man said had come true, and because of that, Ghost Umbra couldn't shake the unease in his heart. This war was not just another battle. It was the turning point of history, and Ghost wanted to know. What would come next, and could he stand against it when it arrived? But before he could find his answer, the battle neared its end. The Empire's victory seemed absolute. The masked man V, now cornered, finally unleashed Fry Starlight's form, his last desperate transformation. And with that, Fry himself had no choice but to step forward. V's rampage looked like the final breath of the Ultra's resistance. But Ghost Umbra knew better. No, this wasn't the end. The real battle had yet to begin. At least, not yet. The battle raged on, and the masked man V finally decided to unleash everything he had left. His ultimate form, the form of Fry Starlight. That abnormal state was born from V's innate shattering ability, known as the Covenant of Mirrors. This covenant allowed V to perfectly mimic Fry Starlight. His movements, his aura, and his merciless, destructive style of combat. With it, V became capable of reproducing most of Frey's techniques he had personally witnessed, turning him into a walking catastrophe. Amidst the sea of corpses and the rivers of blood that soaked the battlefield, V rampaged across the land, seeking to overturn the tide in favor of the Ultras. In the form of Fry Starlight, his output exceeded even SS Plus rank, making him one of the few on the field that almost no one could face. But this time, V's misfortune had reached its peak, for the real monster was nearby. The moment V's rampage began, his dark flames devouring everything around him, he found himself standing face to face with the real Fry Starlight, who appeared before him from out of nowhere. When Frey's violet eyes met V's crimson gaze, their auras clashed violently, even before their blades could meet. Fry smirked. "That's strange," he said. "You're supposed to be a copy of me, yet you don't resemble me at all." And he was right. V looked like an imitation built from an older version of Fry. A reflection that was no longer accurate. The masked fighter wielded two legendary swords, the Golden Claymore and the Moonlight Blade, both relics comparable to Frey's own divine weapons. But Fry himself had long since changed. His cherished sword, Balerion, had transformed into a dark, metallic gauntlet that covered his entire left arm. A demonic, iron-black limb radiating ominous energy. Within that hand, he gripped the Dark Sister. This new fighting style allowed Fry to fuse the might of both weapons, channeling a far greater level of destructive power than ever before. So when their blades finally met, Fry struck directly with the Dark Sister, while V blocked with both of his swords. But even though V fought with two, and Fry only wielded one, V didn't last a single second. The violet aura engulfed the black flames, and V was sent skidding backward several meters. From a single slash of the Dark Sister, V let out a feral roar and leapt at Fry again, his dark flames burning hotter, his moonlight blade devouring all other energies in its path. At the same time, he began using the Golden Claymore's powers as well. He pointed it toward Fry, and in an instant the Claymore extended at supersonic speed, stretching dozens of meters to impale him. But Fry merely twisted his body, deflecting it with ease as it whistled past him. Seeing that, Frey's eyes narrowed. "I see. So you didn't just copy my techniques. You copied the style of the Claymore's former wielder as well. The Claymore was a terrifying weapon. A blade capable of fighting at any range, near or far, making its wielder an exceptionally difficult opponent. And the previous bearer, Melina, had once been the strongest female duelist in existence. V's movements now mirrored her combat rhythm perfectly. It was almost nostalgic. Thus began a furious exchange between Fry and V, two figures whose movements mirrored one another, each step, slash, and feint perfectly synchronized. The technique 10,000 steps of shadow echoed through both their blades. Yet with every clash, it became clear that V was falling behind. Unable to keep pace with the real thing, their exchange was lightning fast. But Fry, wielding only one sword, parried all of V's attacks, and shielded himself from the black flames with a violet aura barrier. Even now, Fry wasn't fighting seriously. He hadn't shown even a fraction of his full strength. He had his reasons. The first, to conserve energy in case an unforeseen threat emerged. The second was curiosity. He wanted to study his opponent. As their blades locked once more, Frey's gaze sharpened. In the blink of an eye, he launched a blinding punch, shattering V's mask to pieces, and revealing his true face beneath. The face of a young man, not much older than Snow, perhaps even younger. Much better, Fry said with a grin. That mask of yours was getting on my nerves. V grit his teeth, trembling, his expression twisted in pain. It was clear that something inside him was breaking. The cause was obvious. His covenant of mirrors. While it allowed him to replicate his opponent's powers, it also forced him to mirror their personalities, creating a constant storm of conflicting identities within his mind. At first, he had mirrored Fry Starlight himself, a man who endured endless suffering, a man forged by pain and defiance. That alone was enough to crush most people. But when Gavid Linman forced him to copy even more individuals, his mind became a prison of screaming voices. Now, in the middle of his duel with Fry, V unleashed a chaotic fusion of many styles. Gavid's brutal swordsmanship, Murgo's cleaving technique, and countless other devastating abilities. Belonging to powerful warriors he had mimicked before, he unleashed all of it. A storm of blades, flames, and madness upon Fry Starlight. But amid that storm, Fry deflected everything. Every strike, every blast, every scream of desperation. And that only drove V further into hysteria, swinging harder, faster, desperate to land even one cut. Soon, their clash became the most violent duel on the entire battlefield. They fought near the borders of Caelid, the very city where V had been born. In other words, this was his last chance to save what remained, to prevent total annihilation at the hands of the Empire. Tell me, V, Fry said between sparks of light and fire. Why do you fight so desperately? Their blades screeched against each other, sparks flying like stars in the night. You know better than anyone, Fry continued, that you can't defeat me. Slash. With a lightning-fast slash, Fry tore through V's chest, then followed up with a flurry of rapid, merciless strikes. V struggled to resist, drawing on his demonic pact to regenerate his wounds. But his regeneration was far slower than Fry Starlight's. Fry had already learned the limits of his body back in that bloody duel against Zebar. His regeneration belonged to the second stage of shadow adaptation. A body that had acclimated to nearly every form of physical damage imaginable, allowing him to recover from almost anything. Unless he was hit by something truly alien, he would heal with ease. Even Zebar's Katarina blade could no longer harm him, for his body had already adapted to it. It was a terrifying ability. One of Frey's most overwhelming assets. In comparison, V's demonic regeneration was far inferior. No matter how much you try to copy me, Fry said, even if you use my same powers, you'll never defeat me. Because there are things you simply cannot copy. V's ability was formidable, but not without limits. Its greatest flaw was that it couldn't replicate world-breaking powers. Especially the Shadow Adaptation, one of the 3 greatest boundary-shattering abilities in existence. That single skill was a fusion of 7 world-breaking abilities. The same 7 collected by Nameless throughout his legendary journey. Fry currently possessed only 4 of them, but even that was enough to push his strength far beyond anything human. V knew this better than anyone. He had copied Fry, seen through his eyes, and for a brief moment, understood his emotions and his perception of the world. He knew he couldn't win. He knew he stood before a monster. But still, he couldn't stop. Too much was at stake. As their swords clashed again and again, V's mind raced desperately, searching for a way to turn the tide. The form of Fry Starlight would only last a few more minutes. If he didn't act now, he'd lose everything. Boom! A burst of black fire erupted. But Fry instantly repelled it. He swung the Dark Sister at a speed far beyond human comprehension, unleashing a storm of violet slashes that rained down upon V from every direction. Fry pressed forward with brutal precision, and in V's eyes, the scene before him was pure horror. He can regenerate from every kind of damage instantly, V muttered, deflecting blow after blow. Bit by bit, the darkness surrounding him was being crushed. He can adapt to his opponent's style mid-battle, making a duel against him utterly hopeless. Frey's swordsmanship was absolute. He was a true master of the blade, beyond anyone V had ever seen in his life. Boom! With another fierce strike, Fry sent him flying. He has complete control over his aura, V whispered, trembling. He can use every drop of it with perfect precision. Despair crept into his eyes. How can I possibly defeat him? The hero of the Ultras asked himself. But no answer came, so he did the only thing left to do. He roared. His voice filled with fury, and charged at Fry once more. But Fry parried him again, effortlessly, unmoved by V's frantic rage. He was calm, in absolute control of the battle. V, you possess a remarkable gift, Fry said quietly. A power that could have placed you on the same level as me and Snow, if only you'd learned to master it fully. But you've chosen to wield it for the wrong side. He wasn't fighting seriously anymore. He was holding back. If Fry truly wanted to, the battle would have ended long ago. But he hesitated. Because deep down, he didn't want to kill V. Unlike Fry, the superhuman whose body had transcended mortality, or Snow, the wielder of light, V was still human. Yes, his blood carried traces of demonic energy, but at his core he was still one of them. And his talent. His potential was extraordinary. The reason you fight so fiercely, Fry said softly, it isn't out of love for the Ultras, nor for the land you were born in. It's because you're being forced to. Isn't it? V let out a wild, beastly scream in response. Boom! Their swords collided again in a violent explosion. Is it your family? Your friends? What does Gavid Linman hold over you? That makes you fight for him like this. Shut your damn mouth, V bellowed, his dark flames raging higher. What the hell do you know about me? About my master? You, who were born on the other side of the world. Boom! The explosions kept coming, and the duel reached its breaking point, V giving everything he had, and Fry still refusing to deliver the final blow. Each had their own reason to fight. And in a way, V's reason wasn't so different from Frey's. The so-called hero of the Ultras had once been an orphan. Just like Snow Lionheart, he never knew his parents, nor his origins. The first thing he remembered was waking up inside an orphanage. That orphanage belonged to Lord Gavid Linman, who raised children from birth, to forge them into weapons of war for the Ultras. And among all those children, V had been the most gifted. He was a prodigy. His talent outshined all others. But his flaw was the absence of will. V never loved battle. He never wanted war, blood, or pain. All he ever wanted was a quiet, peaceful life, far from the chaos. But that was something Gavid Linman could never allow. And so, the man created a reason for him to fight. A reason born of cruelty. He used the other orphans. The children V had grown up with, his only family. As tools, as leverage. While Fry and V clashed in the heart of the battlefield, Gavid Linman was there too. Even now, he still held the souls of the people V cared for most. Those who had been bound to him since childhood. V had never been given a choice but to fight. How pitiful! Fry muttered, increasing the flow of aura through his body. To be honest, I have no interest in saving the lives of the Ultras. I wouldn't hesitate for even a second to kill anyone who stands in my way. But still, it's a waste. A talent like yours shouldn't have been thrown away like this. A chilling smile spread across Frey's face. Before I finish you, let me test the limits of your imitation. As his words fell, an unfamiliar dark aura began swirling around the Dark Sister. An aura unlike Frey's usual violet radiance. It was heavier, colder, and infinitely more oppressive. V shuddered the moment he felt its gravity. This is the black hole aura, Fry said softly. An aura unlike anything else in this world. The black hole aura was Frey's most devastating weapon. A cataclysmic force that could erase everything in its path. But it came with a severe drawback. Its consumption rate was monstrous, draining Frey's energy far faster than his normal aura. Even so, he chose to reveal it before V. The moment he did, a jet-black slash tore through the air, ripping apart the very fabric of space. The strike was colossal. V barely had time to raise both swords to block, but the black hole aura consumed everything. And a deep, horrific gash carved itself across his chest. Barely standing, V staggered back, gasping. That was just a glimpse of it, Fry said, approaching slowly. Had I unleashed it fully, you wouldn't even be standing right now. His tone was calm, almost casual, as if this weren't a battle to the death at all. Meanwhile, V was on his knees, coughing blood, his breath ragged and broken. He could no longer hear Frey's words. Only the deafening roar of war around them and the shrill ringing that filled his ears. The wound across his chest refused to heal. Even his demonic regeneration couldn't overcome the destruction of the black hole aura. A power that surpassed even the corrupted light of his own moonlight blade. Still, V rose again, teeth clenched, and charged. Good, Fry said with a faint smile. Let's continue then. Their blades collided once more, explosions of aura erupting with every clash. But Fry wasn't fighting to end it quickly. He was deliberately prolonging the battle, testing his opponent. The Covenant of Mirrors. It's said to let the user copy others' powers, Fry said between blows. But that's not quite true, is it? Boom. Steel met steel again as Fry continued his analysis mid-combat. It's not copying, he said. It's simulation. That's a more accurate term. V couldn't copy true world-breaking abilities. He could only simulate what he saw, replicating movements, aura patterns, and styles to a degree, but never perfectly. If my theory's right, Fry murmured, parrying another strike, you can't replicate my black hole aura. But you'll try to mimic it, won't you? Their blades clashed again. And Frey's grin widened. He was right. V's aura was evolving, growing darker and heavier with each exchange. Your covenant is trying to keep up with me, Fry said. You're simulating my black hole aura itself. With every collision, V's aura intensified. His black flames burning brighter, his power rising unnaturally fast. Yet compared to Fry, it was still nothing. I wonder, Fry whispered, smiling as their blades locked again. How far can you push it? Can your imitation ever reach the real thing? Or are you bound by your limits? He swung the Dark Sister again, his aura flaring violently. Let's find out, V. And thus began one of the most spectacular duels of the entire war. a battle so fierce it drew every gaze on the field. From afar, the two looked evenly matched, their blows shaking the ground and splitting the sky. But those like Snow Lionheart, who were close enough to sense the truth, knew better. Fry was overwhelmingly superior. Even so, V's strength was growing, his power surging higher with every second. If Fry represents 100%, Snow said quietly, watching, then V entered this battle at maybe 30% of that level. But now, I'd say that percentage has risen dramatically. It was an incredible development. But still not enough. Even if V somehow reached 100%, he still couldn't win, because Fry hadn't unleashed even half of his true power. This was a one-sided test, and Fry was dragging it out intentionally. Snow didn't understand why. If it continued like this, Fry would start exhausting the energy he might need later. Snow prepared to step in and end it. But it wasn't necessary. As expected, V finally reached his limit. Amid their violent clash, his body suddenly faltered, his strength vanishing all at once. Fry stopped in place, lowering his sword. "It seems," he said quietly, "that your time has run out." Fry exhaled deeply, his expression one of quiet disappointment. "You lasted 9 minutes," he said flatly. "A respectable time, but nowhere near enough to win a real battle." Despite the words, V refused to accept defeat, his body trembling as he tried to stand. "I haven't lost. Not yet." "You lost the moment this fight began," Fry replied. "You can't defeat me, and there's no point denying it." "No, not yet." V gritted his teeth, forcing his body to move under the unbearable pressure crushing him. He was gambling everything, his life itself, just to gain a few more seconds in Fry Starlight's form, to fight until the very last breath. Drawing out the strengthened aura within him, V unleashed all his remaining power, swinging both swords in unison. 10,000 steps of shadow, Fry Starlight style. He roared, and Frey's eyes narrowed. He knew what was coming next. And it would not be something simple. And indeed, V released the strongest attack he had ever managed to replicate. Nameless judgment. Not one, but two. From each of his blades. In a scene almost identical to the moment Fry had unleashed twin nameless judgments against Zebar. Standing before the raging waves of aura, the twin strikes formed a colossal cruciform explosion. A cross of divine destruction that threatened to consume Fry entirely. A few seconds later, the inevitable came. The nameless judgment detonated, its shockwave shaking the heavens themselves. The immense explosion silenced the battlefield. For a brief moment, the entire war halted. All eyes turned toward the towering wave of aura, a storm that had swallowed a vast stretch of land. The destructive radius was immense. Many perished instantly just from being near it. Soldiers of both the Ultras and the Empire alike. But none of that mattered. What mattered was Fry Starlight. And Fry Starlight alone. Had V done it? Had he finally struck down the monster? Even if Fry had survived, surely he couldn't have come out unscathed. That attack should have drained him, wounded him. Something. V, more than anyone, waited for the result, breathless, trembling. Then, he heard it. Not a voice. A sound. A cold, vicious sound of steel-piercing flesh. V froze. His body went rigid. Slowly he looked down, and saw it. A black sword had run him through from behind, this tip emerging from his chest, dripping with blood. He turned his head slightly, and there stood Fry Starlight, completely unscathed, his violet eyes as cold as the void. This is the end. V coughed blood, the realization hitting him like a final blow. Fry had never taken the attack. He hadn't even tried to block it. Defending against something like nameless judgment would have only drained him. So instead, he had simply teleported, avoiding it entirely, and reappeared behind V to finish it in a single strike. He'd known all along that V would use nameless judgment. He had been waiting for that exact moment. V's attack was indeed powerful, but what good is power when it never hits its mark? And just like that, it was over. Fry pulled his blade free from V's chest, and the young warrior collapsed immediately, his body falling lifeless to the blood-soaked ground. The commanders of the Ultras looked on, their eyes wide, their spirits breaking, their last beacon of hope. The boy who bore Frey's reflection was gone, shattered, defeated, his mirrored light extinguished. As V's blood spread across the battlefield, Fry stood silently beside him. Expressionless, emotionless, a figure of cold inevitability. And with that, the beginning of the end had arrived. The battle that would witness the fall of the Ultras' capital had truly begun. The battle on the borders of Caelid was reaching its end. The Imperial army had advanced with terrifying force, crushing nearly all remaining resistance from the Ultras. Once Fry Starlight defeated V, everything began to move rapidly. So rapidly it felt as if the entire war was collapsing inward. The Empire went into a frenzy. Their advance was brutal, unstoppable. The War of Darkness had raged for months, and throughout those months, countless Imperial citizens had perished. Both the soldiers who marched to fight and the innocents left behind. Nothing would ever be the same after this war. That much was certain. And because of everything that had happened, the loss, the grief, the endless bloodshed, the hatred between both sides had reached its peak. That hatred turned the soldiers of the Empire merciless. They slaughtered the Ultras without hesitation, even those who fought to their final breath. What began as a structured battle soon devolved into chaos. At some point, the commanders lost control entirely. The soldiers were no longer following orders. They were competing to see who could kill the most. The battlefield had turned into a storm of blood and madness. Amid the carnage, Gavid Linman was finally defeated, brought down by Sir Alone Valerian and Mikar Valerian, who struck together. His old comrade Murgo managed to retreat, barely escaping the encirclement. The Imperial troops failed to finish him off. Gavid Linman fought savagely until the end. The perfect image of a warrior who refused to fall, a soldier who stood tall for the land that birthed him. He drained his demonic contract to the last drop, unleashing every ounce of his power and skill. But in the end, defeat was inevitable. The Imperials not only defeated him, they captured him. Sir Alone had severed his sword arm in a lightning-fast strike that even Gavid's phantom form couldn't evade. The capture of Gavid Linman was the second blow to the Ultras, right after V's fall. The morale of the Imperial troops soared to the heavens. It was a catastrophe for the Ultras. Within moments, the Imperial soldiers pushed them back even farther, and the battle unexpectedly spilled inside Caelid itself. This had not been part of the plan. The Imperial commanders hadn't wanted to drag the civilians of the city into the fighting. But the fury of war and the burning hatred within the soldiers made restraint impossible. As the Ultras fled into the city streets, the Imperial troops followed relentlessly. And a massacre began. Blood flowed through Caelid's streets. Every Ultra who resisted was cut down without mercy. From a distance, Aegon Valerian, the supreme commander, watched in silence. That unsettling smile never left his face. He could have stopped it at any moment. The Empire had already won. There was no need for more blood. But the prince said nothing. He let the army tear through the city's walls, spreading ruin and death. It was a complete slaughter. The Ultras were butchered both outside and within their own capital. In the streets, in the homes, everywhere. Amid that nightmare, Snow Lionheart walked forward, his steps heavy, with most of the elite class gathered around him. That formation existed by Frey's insistence. He had ordered his comrades to remain near him. Because of that, all of them saw what was happening, and their faces darkened. "This isn't a battle anymore," said Ceres Moonlight, staring at the crimson swamp that soaked her once white boots. "It's a massacre. The massacre of Caelid. Every passing second claimed dozens more lives." As Snow and the others advanced slowly through the carnage, they suddenly noticed a familiar figure emerging from the haze. It was Fry. He had returned to their ranks. And of course, no one was surprised he was unharmed, given his power. But their eyes turned to what he was carrying in his arms. "Fry, what are you doing?" Snow asked, frowning. "Why did you bring him?" The reaction was understandable. The one Fry carried wasn't just anyone. It was V, the fallen hero of the Ultras, defeated and drenched in his own blood. Fry glanced at him briefly before looking back to Snow. "I deliberately held back during my final strike," he said calmly. "I kept him alive." "And why would you do that?" Snow asked, his tone sharp, the others equally displeased. "That creature is one of the strongest among the Ultras," said Selena, the sorceress. "He can copy others. If we let him live, he might become something even worse." Fry exhaled faintly. "I know exactly what he's capable of," he replied. "That's precisely why I chose to spare him. His ability might prove useful one day." He dropped V to the ground before them. The young warrior lay there in a pitiful state, his body broken and soaked in blood. But what stood out most were the violet aura threads slithering through his body like serpents. "I've infused him with my own aura," Fry said. "I sealed every channel in his body. He won't be able to move a muscle as long as I'm here. I want him imprisoned." He turned to Demon Valerian. "I'll leave that to you, Demon." Demon frowned at the sudden request but quickly understood why Fry had chosen him. As a royal, Demon had the authority to ensure the prisoner's survival, even someone as dangerous as V. "I don't know what you're planning, Starlight," he said. "But fine. Leave it to me." "Thank you," Fry replied simply. V was dragged away moments later, leaving only the echoes of battle and the stench of blood in the air. Fry had decided to spare his life, because after witnessing the true potential of that young man's power, a power that mirrored his own in terrifying ways, he knew it might one day change everything. Humans were far weaker than demons, and Fry believed that such a gifted talent shouldn't be wasted. He would have to find a way to make V loyal to him, or at the very least an ally. That would be difficult, but now wasn't the time to think about it. The priority was the ongoing battle, or rather, the massacre. Khalid had fallen. The Empire now controlled nearly 90% of it in record time, following the defeat of V and Gavid Linman. And during that conquest, one of the darkest atrocities since the beginning of the war unfolded. The scene was horrific. So much so that, for a moment, the Imperial soldiers looked no different from the Ultras themselves, especially the lower blood ranks who had lived their entire lives in cruelty and corruption. "This is the true nature of humanity." Frey's voice was cold as he gripped the Dark Sister with the Valyrian grip. He had preserved most of his strength during the fight against V. He hadn't been forced to exhaust anything significant. That meant he was now at his peak, ready to strike down whatever emerged next. And Fry was almost certain that something would emerge. "I hate this atmosphere. Feels like pure darkness," Snow muttered, stepping beside Fry as they both slowly approached the rear of Khalid. He shared Frey's unease, both of them sensing that a decisive variable was about to appear. They just didn't know how or from where. The Ultras had been slaughtered and the war, at least on the surface, was over. Amid the bloodshed, the screams, and the horror, the Imperial soldiers had already begun to celebrate. The Empire had triumphed over the Ultras. The corrupt dominion that had plagued them for centuries had finally fallen, and that was reason enough for celebration. The war had been brutal, merciless. From its very first day, the Empire had lost millions of lives, most of them to the Church, but the greatest pressure came from the Ultras, whose relentless assaults decimated the Empire's finest soldiers. Now, at last, the war's end was something to take pride in. A moment that marked the closure of centuries of suffering. And so they cheered, they shouted, they rejoiced. All of it unfolded beneath the watchful gaze of Prince Aegon Valerian, who stood on high ground, silently observing every detail of the battlefield. Aegon seemed satisfied. Everything had gone according to plan. Every piece had fallen exactly where he wanted it. As he watched from afar, two beams of light descended before him. One revealed Sir Alone Valyrian, and the other Mikar Valyrian, the grandfather, the father, and the son. All present, standing together under the banner of an empire that had just claimed one of its greatest victories. "You have my gratitude for your efforts," Aegon said with a smile. "Thank you for what you've both done for the empire." Mikar said nothing, his mind clearly elsewhere. But Sir Alone nodded, contentment visible in his aged eyes. "You're the one who deserves the thanks, not us," Sir Alone said, placing a hand on Aegon's shoulder. "You led this army magnificently. What you've shown me today is enough. I can now step away from this madness knowing that the Empire has found a capable emperor. One who will lead it for many years to come." He looked up toward the sky, relief softening his expression. "For many years. Better than I ever did. And far better than your father, Mikar." In that moment, in that place, Sir Alone Valyrian officially passed the title on to Aegon. The prince had now become the emperor. Aegon smiled faintly in response. "What you've just done, Sir Alone Valyrian," he said, "will change the course of this empire forever." Slowly, he removed Sir Alone's hand from his shoulder. "I've spent many years studying humans," Aegon continued softly, "examining every detail, observing every flaw, every brilliance. And during that time, I've discovered many fascinating things. Humans are truly remarkable, different. They are living works of art, pieces that must be guided carefully, ruled by someone who understands their worth." His words were strange, unsettling even. Neither Sir Alone nor Mikar understood what he meant. But Aegon had always been known for his eccentricity, for his twisted way of seeing the world. It wasn't entirely surprising to hear him speak like this, even if it felt out of place in such a moment. After all, Aegon had always hidden his true face from the world, at least outwardly. This was the first time he let it show. And why not? They had won. He could afford to show it today. That's what Sir Alone thought. But Aegon kept talking. And with every word, his tone grew stranger, darker. "Something interesting happened to me recently," he said. "Interesting and pitiful at the same time." He turned toward both Sir Alone and Mikar, his gaze sharp and unreadable. "Tell me," he asked, "what do your eyes see when you look at me?" It was a sudden question, cryptic, heavy with meaning. Sir Alone frowned, confused. "What are you talking about?" He wanted his grandson to explain. But Aegon didn't intend to. "Just answer," he insisted, stepping closer, slowly, deliberately, until he stood almost face to face with them. "What do you see when you look at me?" The question was the same, but this time, something changed. Both Sir Alone and Mikar felt it. A weight behind his words, a pressure, strange and suffocating. It forced them to answer. Sir Alone spoke first. "I see the next emperor of this land." Mikar's answer came after a moment of silence. "My son." Nothing more, nothing less. Two answers, from two generations of emperors. And they could not have been more different. Aegon smiled. "Fascinating," he said, laughing softly. "Such difference between two men of the same blood." There was deep amusement in his tone, as if their words revealed a truth only he understood. To him, one of them held great value, and the other none at all. It proved once again how deeply humans differed from one another, even when they shared the same blood. "That difference," Aegon murmured, "is what makes humanity so fascinating." He nodded to himself, as if agreeing with his own conclusion. And in those few quiet moments, the three of them standing at the summit while the soldiers roared beneath them, Sir Alone and Mikar both began to feel something strange. For a fleeting instant, the sound of cheering seemed to fade farther, and farther away. Meanwhile, Aegon's smile widened, slowly twisting into something else entirely. Something that, for reasons they couldn't explain, sent a chill down both of their spines. And amid all the heat and fire of the battle that had just ended, came the moment that changed everything. The turning point no human would ever forget. The moment that would be engraved into history forever. Aegon Valyrian raised his hand slowly, and in the very next second, a strange explosion erupted beside Mikar. He turned instinctively, trying to comprehend what he had just heard. But all he saw was red. As Sir Alone collapsed to the ground, a massive hole torn through his chest by an unseen strike. An attack so sudden, so precise, that neither he nor his grandson had even perceived it. Just like that, the Iron Emperor, Sir Alone Valyrian, who had lived far too long and fought far too many wars, was dead. Instantly, without warning. Everything happened so fast. Mikar stood frozen in his armor, the armor of Sunfire, staring in disbelief at his father's lifeless body. Before him, Aegon still had his hand raised, that same smile carved into his face. In those brief seconds, a storm of thoughts tore through Mikar's mind, desperately trying to make sense of what had just happened. And then Aegon turned toward him. With a single look, Mikar understood. He knew who had done it. He knew exactly what his son had become. Aegon took a step forward. Mikar instinctively took one back. "What's wrong, father? You look surprised," Aegon said, stepping closer, his voice carrying a strange warmth that only made it worse. Lightning began to crackle around Mikar's armor. "You hated grandfather, didn't you?" Aegon continued. "You did. You must have wanted him dead at least once. Come on, admit it, father." With each word, his tone shifted, his voice changing, deepening, warping into something else. Then, without warning, his golden eyes turned crimson, a deep, bleeding red that froze Mikar's heart. Panicking, Mikar lunged forward, thrusting the Sunfire spear with all his might, a strike of fire and thunder meant to obliterate anything in its path. The devastating blast reached Aegon, and stopped, mere centimeters from his face. Mikar's expression went blank, his blood turning to ice. "Why are you looking at me like that, father?" Aegon's voice was no longer calm. It was mocking, inhuman. A thin crack split across his forehead, and from it a third eye opened, emitting a terrible crimson light that made Mikar's very soul tremble. "Tell me, father, what do you see? When you look at me?" Aegon's scream no longer sounded like his own voice. It was something else entirely. Sweet and venomous at the same time. Two shadowed hands erupted from the air, grabbing Mikar by the head. The figure before him began to grow. Taller, broader, monstrous, until it towered more than 2 meters high. Before that abomination, Mikar looked tiny, helpless. Face to face with the creature, he finally realized what stood before him. "Father, oh father," the creature sneered. "That look on your face, priceless." A flood of memories crashed through Mikar's mind. Flashes of a past he had buried deep. A past where a being once appeared before him, taught him forbidden things, and allowed him to preserve the body of a man he had once obsessed over. And now, in this moment, Mikar understood the truth. That being had been beside him all along. It had been his son. Then came the laughter. Loud, twisted. Weskier laughed. Above him, the sky began to turn scarlet. "Ah, how delightful." As he spoke, Mikar's eyes, nose, and mouth erupted in blood. His vision drowned in red, consumed by the gaze of that third, blinding eye. Within seconds, Weskier released him. Mikar fell lifelessly to the ground. Standing atop the summit, he had just slain 2 SS+ ranked warriors in mere moments. While below, the soldiers continued cheering, unaware of anything. To them, he was still Aegon. But Aegon Valyrian no longer existed. Something else had taken his place. Something unspeakable, "Shall we begin, then?" Weskier spread his arms wide, his dark, monstrous form towering under the blood-red sky. He raised his head, smiling, welcoming what was to come. And then, Fry Starlight descended upon him, dark sister in hand, with Snow Lionheart beside him in his anointed war state. Both of them struck as one, their faces grim, filled with disbelief and fury, for the enemy they sought had been behind them all along. At that very moment, the true battle began, and the War of Darkness entered a chapter far blacker than anything that came before.